Clerk, do you want to open?
Sure.
Thank you.
This is to inform the general public that this meeting is being held in compliance with Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975. The notice was emailed to the Star Ledger and filed in the Township Clerk's office on February 18th, 2021, and posted on the Township website on February 19th, 2021. Councilwoman Castellino,
Present.
Councilwoman McCartney,
Present.
Councilman Rutherford,
Present.
Councilwoman Williams,
Present.
Council President Matute Brown,
Present.
Mayor Parisi.
Present.
Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The council is now in their public workshop. Council President?
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk, and to my council colleagues and our administration, thank you so much for your making yourselves available this evening. As we discussed during our last town council meeting, we did ask the administration for a workshop discussion on executive drive. This will include public comment. I think it best to have public comment after the presentation has been made and discussion has been had, and you know, we can listen to public comment at that time. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Parisi, who has a presentation I think he's sharing with us. Mayor Parisi.
Great. Thank you, Council President. Thank you for putting this together, giving us an opportunity to talk about where the project is at this point, and obviously, and perhaps most importantly, answer any questions the council may have, as well as members of the public. We have just about everyone we need from the administration here with us tonight. We think we should be able to answer any concerns or questions that we might have. So I am going to share my screen. You'll tell me if this works.
Yes.
And
Nice job.
everyone can see that?
Yes.
So I appreciate it, Council President. Again, thank you for being here. We're going to talk about Executive Drive and the Executive Drive redevelopment project. Now, for some members of council, as well as some members of the public, and I guess all the members of council might remember this from the last time we spoke about this. The presentation is largely the same. Obviously, there are a few key differences that we'll go through, but certainly some of the slides are the same. So a little bit different than the first time that we talked about this project is the zone itself. And I'll mention this a few times during the presentation, but this graphic right here shows a couple differences in this discussion tonight compared to what the project was the first time, mainly in that the two sections in red and the section in yellow encompassed the redevelopment zone the first time we had this discussion prior to it being overturned by the courts. The discussion for tonight in this version of the plan is only the yellow section, which is 100 Executive Drive, 200 Executive Drive, and 10 Rooney Circle. Now, can you see my cursor? Can anyone see that cursor?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Mayor.
So just for the public and maybe members of council, just to get everyone's bearings, this red triangle shape there, that's 300 Executive Drive. Executive Drive is 100, 200, and 300. 300 was part of the original redevelopment zone, though not part of the plan. It's not even part of that at this point. This is 10 Rooney Circle, and this, of course, is Essex Green. This project and this discussion tonight is only focusing on the area in yellow. So these screens, I don't know that we need to read all through them, but this kind of takes us through a timeline over these next three screens. It shows you just how long we have been talking about this as a community. Some of this started in September 2017. That's it's quite a while ago. Reminds us all of just how fast time goes. But that's when the council first adopted a resolution asking the planning board to study Essex Green or Executive Drive as an area in need of redevelopment. So this is obviously be available to the public. Obviously, if the council wants us to, we can go through all these steps, but I don't know that we need to. I do want to bring us onto this second page here of September 11th, 2020. That's when the appellate division reversed the redevelopment designation. And that's kind of when we started this process over again. So again, but back to the first screen, that's September 2017. We're now into early 21. So this has been a number of years that the township has been working hard to try to figure out a best way to move this property and ultimately the community forward. So once the appellate division reversed the redevelopment designation, we started again on the process. Again, just like in September of 2017, the council adopted a resolution on September 22nd, directing the planning board to again redetermine an area in need of redevelopment. And that ultimately took us through in November, the planning board process, the hiring of a planner into December, and obviously into now into the new year, and brings us to this point now with obviously a lot of discussion, public discussion, a lot of acts by both the council and the planning board in this time. Again, Council President, if you want to go through all these, we're happy to, but I really just wanted the council to see a timeline with the important dates over these last several years that got us to this point. Tonight now, February 22nd, we're reviewing this for the council to consider some of these items tomorrow night, which we'll speak about in a second. And obviously the next council meeting where some of these items will be on second reading will be March 9th. And obviously it's the administration's hope that into the future, these things are built and realized and they become an important part of this community long after all of us are out of public service. So in addition to the plan, we're going to talk a little bit about what the council is going to be asked to consider tomorrow night at February 23rd's council meeting. There's going to be a resolution that's basically going to be a designation of the redeveloper of this property. There's going to be a resolution talking about and committing the matching funds for the library grant, which we'll talk about in a minute. And there'll be an ordinance on first reading to approve the financial agreement, which in essence is the pilot. The March 9th meeting, we'll also have two items relative to this project. It will be another resolution that would ask the council to approve the redevelopment agreement or the RDA. And obviously the ordinance that you're going to be considering tomorrow night, if it passes, that ordinance will be on the March 9th agenda for second reading, which again is the pilot and the financial agreement. As a reminder, Essex Green, though it was part of this redevelopment zone in the beginning, it is not part of this plan. It's not part of this discussion. They've already had renovations approved by the zoning board, which they were entitled to do regardless of it being part of a redevelopment plan and a redevelopment area. The approved project calls for renovation of existing retail space as well as additional square footage and adding new spaces on separate pad sites. I don't know the status of that project. We have spoken to Essex Green several times. I think everyone is certainly in the retail world is in a little bit of a stall related to COVID. So we'll continue to talk with them. And obviously when we get more direction, we'll update the council as to what the intentions might be. But as a reminder, this is not part of this discussion or plan tonight. Just want to Executive Drive redevelopment. It was planning board approved. It's now 30 acres. The initial project that we talked about on the first slide was about 30 acres. Now we're down to about 11 roughly. So now the 3 office buildings, again, it's 100, 200 Executive Drive, as well as 10 Rooney Circle, and roughly about 290,000 of combined square foot of office space. Again, 300 Executive Drive remains an office building with no renovation. That's not part of this redevelopment. It's been sold. It's a separate owner. It's not part of this discussion, though obviously going to be an important part of that entire landscape. 100 and 200 Executive Drive would be demolished for 425 residential apartment units. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And of course, 10 Rooney Circle, which has garnered a lot of discussion over these last several years, that would be provided to the township upon the approval. And that's where we would create new library space as well as additional public spaces. Again, just as a reminder, 300 Executive Drive is not part of this plan or discussion. It remains an office building. Again, it's been sold. It's under separate ownership. They spent a lot of money renovating the space, the office space. It has, as I mentioned, new ownership, and it's only slightly over 50% occupancy. So I don't want to talk too much about that now. Obviously, the council we can discuss later on, but they spent a lot of money in renovating this building, and it's still only slightly above 50% occupancy. So we can talk about the challenges that office space had in this area before COVID, but certainly post-COVID, I don't think it's realistic to think that 100 and 200 Executive Drive are ever going to be viable as office space. This project aside, I don't think you can make that argument that they could be successful office space. We're hoping obviously 300 Executive Drive increases in occupancy, but right now, even after several $1 million in renovations, it's still struggling to fill space. Again, 100 and 200 Executive Drive would be turned into 425 rental units. That's 361 market rate units, 149 one bedrooms, 212 two bedrooms, and 64 affordable rental units, 15 one bedroom, 34 two bedroom, and 15 three bedroom. That's how the 425 rental apartments would be comprised. There's been a lot of talk, and legitimately so, about the traffic that's generated from retail, from rental spaces, apartment spaces, and obviously an important consideration. But I just want to remind both the council and the public that's watching, as an active office complex for years, there was obviously always significant traffic generated. There's a total of 1,600, a little over 1,600 total parking spaces in these 4 office buildings. So there's no doubt that some public space on 10 Rooney Circle and 425 rental units, in addition to 300 Executive Drive, will generate traffic. But we should not forget the fact that as a viable complex for almost 30 years, this building, this property already generated traffic. We don't think that residential complex and this project as we've configured it is going to generate any more traffic than the office complex and the retail center did anyway. And quite honestly, I think the owners of Essex Green and certainly the stores within Essex Green would actually hope it generates more traffic, though we don't think it will necessarily from the residential component. But obviously a successful project being completed on both ends of Executive Drive as well as Essex Green, we all hope would generate a lot more traffic. There's also a lot of talk, and there's always talk, and obviously it's always a legitimate part of any discussion when we're talking about residential communities being added to a community that is in many ways almost 90% built out already as a long-standing community like West Orange in the heart of Essex County in northern New Jersey. So there's always concerns about school children and what is going to be generated by school children. We saw in the previous slide a lot of the units are one bedroom, so we think that's certainly not going to generate significant number of children. But I think also too, it's really easy, and I hear it all the time, that our schools are overcrowded, and there's no doubt in the past they have been overcrowded, but the fact is that right now they're not. Now that doesn't mean we want to fill up those empty spaces as soon as we can, but the most recent demographic study that the Board of Education did shows that our schools have occupancy. Now again, that doesn't give us a green light to throw kids in there, but that in this particular case, at this particular point in time, is not a legitimate concern in terms of the overcrowding of schools. As we all know, whether we're here a long time or whether we were in other towns, because it's the same in all towns, that demographic's going to ebb and flow. Our township schools have been overcrowded for spells and have had significant occupancy for spells as well. So, but right now at this particular time, our schools are not at capacity and not overcrowded, and that's just indicative of the study that the Board of Education themselves did. And if you look at Main Street redevelopment, which is probably the largest residential development project that's been built in West Orange in the recent future, they have very few students now. I guess approaching 70% occupancy, if not a little bit more than that at this point. They have very few school-age children generated from that complex. And just as a matter of law, for the purpose of this discussion, denying a project simply based on potential of potential school children and adding to the overcrowding is not a reason by law that you can deny a project, that you cannot deny zoning simply based on the concerns that it might raise the enrollment in schools. And more importantly than that, forget about the law, forget about the concerns we always have about what impact it might be on the schools. Everything the township does and everything that we've done in this administration has always with an eye on attracting families to West Orange. If we can't do things that are going to attract new families to this community, then we're dying, because we all know that people, they'll live their lives here, they'll move on to retirement communities or retirement homes or or just move on to different places. If we can't be attractive to young families, then real estate's going to suffer and the town's going to suffer as a whole. So I know that we don't want to be careless in our development or careless in what it is that we spend money on, but it should always be with an eye on attracting families, because if we can't create a community that's attractive to young families to move here, then we're, ultimately the community is going to be on a slow spiral downward. So 10 Rooney Circle, what has garnered most of the attention, certainly over recent discussions, it would be deeded to the township at no cost. If the project was approved, the owners of the property, the redevelopers, they would give that property to the township based on its square footage. Again, markets always ebb and flow. And like I mentioned earlier, the commercial market obviously is not as strong, but that building is a viable building. It's in good shape, and it probably has a rough value of $6 to $8 million if we were to buy it. If we were to build it, rough costs are probably $15 million in construction costs. So we should not minimize the significance of this being deeded to the township as part of this deal. Forget about what other components are in this deal. This is a significant asset that would be given to the township. 10 Rooney Circle consists of 3 floors. We'll look at in the next slide that the topography has a little different. So it would be the new location for a library as well as potential other public services. The library, based on my really crude drawing here, apologize for the crudeness of it, but if based on the topography of the building, you see that what would be the main level is actually the 2nd floor. That would be the main floor of the library, but technically the 2nd floor of 10 Rooney Circle, with the lower level of 10 Rooney Circle also being part of the library space. The 3rd floor, where what looks like the 2nd floor from the main entrance, is where the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, is a tenant there, and they are leased through 2024. It's roughly about $600,000 in annual rent that they're paying, and we'll talk about the finances in a bit, but that rent becomes the township. So not only is the property owner and the redeveloper going to give us this building, which is an asset in itself, they're also going to give us the $600,000 a year in rent currently paid for by the TSA. And we'll talk about additional space on that lower level, that 1st floor, for public use in a minute. So of that 1st floor, if we carve out what the library has already built into their plan, and we've all had an opportunity to see the plans that the architect worked out, looks really beautiful and exciting. There's about roughly 6,300 square feet of space unaccounted for on that 1st floor. And it's really 8,300 square feet if you factor in the common spaces, because it does have a separate entrance. So you probably could combine some of the common space into the square footage. So you really could squeeze out reasonably about 8,000 square feet. We've looked at that space as a possible home for the animal shelter. Again, that's contingent upon phase 2 of Main Street redevelopment, which we'll talk about in a bit. But also, since the very early stages of this project and part of the discussion when this was first approved by council, a potential partnership with the Board of Education, as they have a need to find space for a preschool program. And they're also contemplating maybe using it for administrative space and converting the administrative building back into space, usable space for preschool. So they're factoring in a lot of things. They're considering a lot of things, but they're definitely interested in the space, but they're not yet at a point where they're ready to put blueprints together. But either way, this space could serve as, whether it's the animal shelter or space for the Board of Education, or conceivably both, because we don't need 8,000 square feet for an animal shelter. So either way, that's additional space that will be used for some sort of public component, either with partnership with the Board of Education or potentially a new home for the animal shelter. And just real quick, we could talk about it later. Some people's first instinct might be, well, how can you have an animal shelter on the same floor as a library? But the spaces, if you remember the plans, they are separated. And we've talked extensively with the architect. There can be any number of things that can be done to limit sound, separate ventilation systems. So we're not concerned about that. And again, it's a separate entrance on what's the back corner of the property. So it wouldn't even be near that beautiful patio. If you remember, the part of the library plan included a beautiful new outdoor patio, which of course in COVID world is more important than ever. Additionally, in addition to giving us the building and the rent and the prospects of doing so many things with that property, they're going to give us 2 acres of land. As part of that parcel of land is going to be 2 acres. They're going to give it to us, and they're going to construct a dog park and parking lot for this community, not only for the 425 units that will be there, but there's a lot of dogs in town. We don't have a dog park, although there's a couple in close proximity to West Orange. We don't have our own, and part of this project is the developer will give us the land and actually construct the dog park for us at no cost to the township. And in addition to the other space, the unoccupied or unaccounted for space on the first floor of 10 Rooney Circle, this is also a possible location where we might want to build a freestanding animal shelter right next to the dog park. Certainly has value in doing that, and something that we're also keeping open as an opportunity to pursue further. So the library site, hold on, let me just move my screen here. So now let's go back to the existing library site, 46 Mount Pleasant Avenue. Has been approved by the planning board that if the library were to move to 10 Rooney Circle, it would be turned into 61 affordable senior citizen housing units, which we have a great demand for in this community. We'd still leave about 7,500 square feet of community space, either for a senior citizen community center, a library annex, or quite honestly, possibly both. 7,500 square feet is a lot of square footage. There's a number of things we can do there. And actually with the plan as it's been approved, it's going to offer more parking than is currently offered on the site now, even as a library. There'd be $1 million payment from the redeveloper to the township that would help to fund the new library up on 10 Rooney, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it's part of a pilot project. So though it's not significant revenue, right now as a town-owned building, we get no revenue on it at all. So any additional revenue as part of this project would be a bonus. But more importantly, I think even than the revenue, which we'll look at soon as not being very significant, we're going to get 61 affordable senior citizen housing units, which the township really needs to serve the community. So now let's just talk a little bit about pilot funding. For those who hear that word all the time and maybe don't know, just as a reminder to the rest of us, pilot stands for payment in lieu of taxes. It's simply a mechanism used to encourage investment where the project would not otherwise attract investment. So it was an important part of the Main Street project as old warehouse space, and certainly a very different economy. There was very little interest in investment in that property without a pilot. And ultimately that's what funded the project and what's funding projects all over North Jersey, which we'll look at in a second, or also when a project provides a public purpose. So when this project first started being talked about several years ago, the administration was clear that we would not support a pilot if it did not provide a public purpose. And we worked hard with the help of our professionals and input from the council and from the public to work with the property owners to develop a public purpose. And we feel that 10 Rooney Circle, a dog park, and all these other amenities is a significant public purpose and warrants the creation of a pilot. And quite honestly, and Mike Hanley, our financial consultant, can speak to this issue later when he speaks to the council or addresses questions from the public. This project's not fundable. It's not possible without a pilot. It's just not possible to finance these projects without the use of a pilot. Now, I joke with people all the time that, unfortunately in our community, and I understand the reason why, but the whole idea of a pilot sometimes is a curse word. You mention it and people's attentions, they come to attention, and if they're nervous about what it means, and someone's stealing something from the town. The truth is it's just not, it's not true. So I hear more than anything, I think we all do, we should do with this town. We should be like this town. Everyone wants to do what some of and mirror some of the successes of our neighboring towns. And that's what we're trying to do here. So if you look at some of our neighboring communities, and some of which have, projects that are booming, they've all been funded with pilots. Roseland, 2 pilots currently and 2 redevelopment projects. And interestingly enough, very similar to what we're talking about here on Executive Drive. We all know Becker Farm Road. Well, what a lot of people don't know is Becker Farm Road is suffering significant financial setbacks because of the office space market dying. Some of those properties are being turned into residential complexes and other redevelopment projects funded by pilots. Bloomfield, 6 pilots currently in 6 redevelopment projects. Orange, right next door, has a lot of exciting projects going on. Right now, 2 are pilots, and we suspect that number to grow exponentially in the next couple of years. South Orange, obviously the benefits of a downtown train station, but a lot of exciting things happening there, mostly residential complexes, 6 pilots. Verona, most people might think of Verona as a sleepy little town next door that we all drive through when we're heading up Bloomfield Avenue, but they've got a lot of neat little things going on, a few nice buildings that have been built, funded with pilots. Montclair, we all talk about Montclair and the Bloomfield Avenue area and all the exciting things happening there in combination of commercial and residential buildings. They're funded with 4 pilots. So it's real easy to, look to neighboring towns and their successes and let's say we should do that, we should do that. In this case, we're trying to be creative with an interesting project that provides a lot of public component, but yes, it provides a pilot and it's no different than most towns in this area. And Mike Hanley again can talk later. Most projects in North Jersey, if not all of New Jersey, these redevelopment projects are being funded with pilots. In our case, and I would argue much better than some of these neighboring towns, we're getting a lot of givebacks, a lot of public benefits with this pilot, much more so than these other towns are. So let's talk about the New Jersey Aspire program. And admittedly, Mike Hanley might want to talk a little bit more closely about this later on, and maybe Rich Trank from legal. I've gotten a crash course in the Aspire over the last couple of days because it was something that the council president wanted us to look into. She was pretty well versed on what it meant, and we've looked at it. There's a few problems. We think that maybe it doesn't necessarily benefit in this case, but we're going to talk about that. But it is part of the New Jersey Economic Recovery Act of 2022, and it provides new incentives to developers to develop projects that are challenged and also modify some existing benefits. It is part and created under the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, or the EDA. The problem is, and one of the reasons we think it might not benefit us in this case, is because you look at the Act of 2020. It's just been passed recently, and besides the belief that a lot of amendments need to be drafted and passed to amend the well-intentioned statute, but maybe need some modifications to make it worthwhile. But beyond that, even, they have not yet created the regulations. Any law that's passed ultimately is going to need regulations for how they enact that. We're seeing that right now with marijuana being passed at the polls in November. The state hasn't even begun to pass or work on the regulations yet. And that's the same situation we're in right now, unfortunately, with the Aspire program. They simply haven't drafted, let alone approved, amended, and approved again, of the regulations for the program. There's very specific criteria that has to be met for a project to be Aspire eligible. In this case, it has to be not economically feasible without the tax credit that Aspire provides. It does provide financing, or the project has to have a financing gap in how they can get the project completed. It has to be an incentive area, very similar to what we have designated as an area in need of redevelopment. And it has to have not started at time of Aspire program. So technically, in this case, this project does apply because we haven't started yet. So a project can't start and then all of a sudden apply for Aspire. So we can meet that without an issue as well. And it has to comply with EDA sustainability standards, which although this project, because of the concern of the planning board and members of council, does have a certain level of sustainability standards, it doesn't meet what the EDA's sustainability standards are. So that would be an added cost to this project that is not built into the pro forma when you look at, again, all the public givebacks, and has to comply with the EDA's affirmative action requirements, and has to be prevailing wage. It means all the projects, all the contractors, all the development that would be done would have to be built by paying prevailing wage, union wage. And though an important social service, social kind of issue that we want to recognize, in this particular case, the financing of this project is not based on the prevailing wage. That would add significant costs to the operations and to the pro forma. Again, Mike Hanley can speak about that later, but that basically makes all the public givebacks impossible, which again, we could talk about that in a bit. It has to be completed in 4 years from the award of the tax credits, has to have a 20% low to moderate income housing and a 5% workforce housing as well. So these are the criteria that a project has to meet, all of them, to be Aspire eligible. And again, setting aside the fact that Aspire has not yet drafted the regulations, we have to meet all the standards, which unfortunately we don't. So we're simply not clear that Executive Drive actually qualifies for all those criteria. The current project anticipates an 8-year completion, where right now Aspire requires 4. And when you're building residential units, it's not always realistic to think that the absorption rate is going to be completed in only 4 years. And also our current project, though, has an affordable housing component, it does not have a workforce housing component. So that's, again, something that would have to be modified and ultimately just add to the cost of the project. And the current pro forma does not account for prevailing wage. So it doesn't account for the sustainability guidelines, doesn't account for workforce housing. And unfortunately, doesn't account for prevailing wage. So all those things would simply drive up the cost and probably eliminate most, if not all, of the public givebacks. Not to mention, we'd have to kind of go back to the beginning to start all that. And again, besides all those things that we think maybe seem, though Aspire is probably going to be a really good program, we don't think it really applies to this project. Besides those few components that we don't meet, there's simply no current regulations for enacting the Aspire program. So until the legislature were to create those regulations and the EDA figure out how they're going to work that, this project would not be able to even apply. No project at this point can technically even apply. So let's look at the library project cost. If we are in fact going to move forward with this project, if we decide that 10 Rooney Circle is where we want to move the library, the total costs are about $6.2 million. And be quite honest with you, that's a little bit higher than the last time we met, because basically once we sat down, once the council approved the library to retain an architect and to put formal plans together, they added a few things that ended up driving the cost up. Obviously, project costs always change. One of the things they added again is that beautiful outdoor patio, which, in the beginning, a lot of us might have looked at and said, well, is that really necessary? Although we have a much better outdoor space at 10 Rooney than we do at Mount Pleasant Avenue. Certainly, all of a sudden, COVID hits, and now the idea of a beautiful outdoor space for the public is a lot more attractive than it probably maybe would have been for any of us to consider. So I guess in many ways, Dave and the library trustees were ahead of their time in asking for an outdoor space. The developer, again, who would develop the existing library space with the affordable senior citizen housing units, would give $1 million to the town. So right there, $1 million. The redevelopment funding through the RAB bonds as part of the pilot project would contribute $1.5 million. And again, this was just a hope, a pipe dream when we first had these conversations all that time ago. The state had created the library funding, the capital funding project, and Dave and his staff put a beautiful and a grant application together. Not only was it really comprehensive, but it was done fast. So they were one of the first towns in, and a credit to Dave and his team. They were granted the full $3.1 million. The state approved them for every nickel they applied for. And that's really exciting news and shouldn't be lost on us. This is $3.1 million that the state's willing to give us. And I can tell you, it's not very often in my years in government that we can get that much money for one project. So this is kind of an exciting addition to this discussion that was really just a kind of a hope when we had this conversation several years ago. Obviously, because of the increased funding on the library costs, it ends up with a $600,000 contribution from the township to meet the 6.2 because we do have to match the grant of 3.1, but we're able to get most of that funding from the developer. So again, when you put all that together, we can get a beautiful new library. And let's not forget the fact, this is just the library, doesn't account for the $6 to $8 million building that the project is going to give us with the $600,000 in annual rent we're going to collect from the third floor tenant. So where would that extra $600,000 come from? Let's not minimize the importance of $600,000, but we think there are other areas that the money is already accounted for. If you remember Main Street redevelopment phase 2, and that's something the council and the administration, the township will be discussing over these next couple months, if not throughout 2021, does provide for $9 million in funding to the township as part of the relocation of public works and the animal shelter. So that's where we would have the money to fund an animal shelter, whether it was in 10 Rooney Circle or whether it was a freestanding structure next to the dog park. So there is money that comes from that. Also, the capital budget. Look, the library is an older building, like a lot of the buildings we've had in town. And over the last handful of years, the township, the council has approved $828,000 in approved capital budget projects for the existing library building, that if we were to move in this direction, we don't need to spend that money. Now, I'm not saying it's not town money, but it's already been spent, allocated for, and budgeted. So it's already there. We could use that not only for perhaps additional $600,000, but maybe additional money towards fitting out the rest of the public space. And the township's working, again, this was really at the urging and insistence of the council president. We've been having lengthy conversations with the developer to get additional funding. Now, we don't have an answer to that tonight, but we will by the time the second reading, if the council were to move on the ordinance tonight. By the time the second reading came around on March 9th, which would include the residential, the resolution on that night, that would be the developer's agreement. That developer's agreement will include some level of additional contribution. I know the council president, obviously all of us would have hoped for a lot more, and we're going to see if we can't eke out a little bit more. But there's already, I don't want to minimize the significance of what they're already contributing. And again, the bigger the project, the more we can get in gifts. The truth of the matter is, at 425 units, I don't want to poo-poo that number, but it's not a huge development project. So when they're already giving us a building and some other concessions, there's only so much you can pull from that, based on the size of the project. If it was a 1,000-unit building or 1,000-unit complex, I'm sure we can get a lot more. But we're certainly going to keep trying. And by the time we get to the March 9th meeting, if in fact the council decides to move forward and pass these issues tomorrow night, we'll wrap that up. We expect to get more from the developer. We're just not exactly sure just what yet. So here's something I just want to address. It kind of takes a little sidestep in a different direction for a second, but there's been a lot of discussion, about where the library is now and where we're looking to move it and who are we hurting. And obviously we don't want to hurt anybody. We have some solutions to that problem already of hurting people in that neighborhood who might enjoy walking access to the library. But I think it's important to know that, we serve, and everything we do, we serve the whole community. And when you look at these numbers, the library is part of the Bergen County Cooperative Library System, which means all the cards, library cards, are all linked together through one system. So we have an idea of where the library cards are housed, where they're residing, and where they're actually using for circulation. So if you look at Montclair, much bigger circulation than our library, but you look at the off-site circulation, only about under 6%, which means only about 6% of Montclair residents are actually going to other towns to fulfill their library needs. Glen Ridge, 13, Roseland, 13, Maplewood, a little over 4, Livingston, under 3. And that arguably could be because of the beautiful new library they built. But when you look at West Orange, high circulation, not as high as Livingston, not as high as Montclair, but 21% of our residents are, I shouldn't say that, 21% of the residents who have a library card who are using library services are finding that use and fulfilling that need in other towns. So I'm not saying that the current library where it is doesn't serve an important need in that neighborhood, but if you look at these numbers, we clearly can do better in reaching the community we have an obligation to reach. And there's no doubt when you look at all these towns, they have out-of-town circulation. A lot of that could be where someone might live in a town. They might live closer to a library in the next town just because of where they live. That's fine. So there's always going to be a number. But when you look at all these numbers, all less than 13, some less than 5, and we're at 21 and a half, to me, our existing library location and perhaps our existing library isn't fulfilling the need that our community is looking for. So I understand that people are concerned about the location, but you can't say, and I've heard it, that no one knows where Executive Drive is, you're not going to find it. Well, it's the center of town. Essex Green is the geographic center of this community. So though it might not be well known because people don't drive down there, if it's going to be developed and turned into a public space, there's going to be much better signage, there's going to be much better communication, and people are going to be able to find it. And I'm not saying this number is going to go down to 0, but whether or not we're comfortable philosophically in moving the library off of downtown or not, you can't argue with the statistic that a lot of people in our community are not feeling that our library is fulfilling their library needs. So how do we tie it together, and how do we address the issue of the people in the neighborhood who might rely on the walking traffic? We tie it all together. How does this get tied all together? We already have a jitney program that takes our commuters to work, to the train stations in the morning, picks them up in the evening. Those same buses serve as our senior citizen transportation program during the day. They take our seniors to rec events, social events, the pool, doctor's appointments, shopping, any number of visits on an annual basis. So how do we connect the library and the new library site so we don't leave anyone out? Well, the township for years has looked into and wanted to figure out a way to create and connect the entire township with a public jitney, an intra-town jitney, as opposed to just those taken to specific appointments or taking those to buses. And this ultimately is the impetus for us doing that, because part of the approval that Joe Alpert got to construct the senior citizen housing units on the existing library site, part of the tax credit he got that helped finance that, requires a senior citizen transportation program. So we don't know what the split on funding would be, but this will enable us to create something we've wanted to do for years, not only taking people from the new senior citizen building at the existing library site to the new library, not only taking people from that neighborhood to the new library site, but it'll allow us to create and fund an intra-township jitney program that will take people to Essex Green. It'll take people to Northfield Avenue, to the zoo. It'll take people to the pool. It will literally ride around town with designated spots and give people an opportunity to either not have to take their car, or for those who rely on transportation, have the means of getting around town to the various township facilities and amenities with a jitney. And again, most of this will be funded by this new project, not necessarily by the township. So we recognize that moving the library, even though a library annex might still be there, might be a hardship. We're going to provide transportation for people in town, wherever they live, to get all over town to the various sites in town as part of this project. So let's look at some of the annual revenue projections. Again, I mentioned earlier, the current library site does not pay anything. It's a township-owned property. So under the pilot mechanism, all state statute, again, Mike Hanley can talk about this later, it's all governed by statute. So based on the number of units, we would get $38,000 a year in funding from the existing library site, not a fortune, but more than we get now. We get rental income from the TSA, again, the third floor leased for another several more years. That'd be $600,000 a year. The annual pilot funding from Executive Drive as part of this pilot would be a little under $700,000. And then you got to look at, where's the funding upon completion of all this is about $1.2 million, but you got to pull out what the existing taxes on Executive Drive to get to a net is a little over $300,000. The RAD payment that we would have to pay down the bonds would be about $325,000. And the taxes on 300 Executive Drive. Remember, Executive Drive number 300 is not part of this project. They pay simple property taxes, no pilot there. They'll continue to pay those taxes, a little over $115,000. So we're talking net municipal income of, just under $700,000 when you look at the breakdown of the $1.2 million in funding from the pilot and the other expenses that come with that. So you're talking about what's currently, about $680,000. You're talking about $685,000 in new revenue. That's even after the RAD payment is funded that we don't have currently, not to mention the public amenities and buildings that are going to be provided as part of this project. So I do want to pause for a second, just again, to talk about pilots. Again, I know that we all, again, sometimes the pilot's like a curse word. It gets everyone's attention. But there's some things that are talked about repeatedly that are simply just not true. The pilot does not impact school funding. In New Jersey law, the public schools get 100% of whatever it is they approve as a budget, and ultimately that the county approves their budget. Doesn't matter what problem the township may be having in tax collection, doesn't matter what problem we may be having or benefits we might be having in pilot funding, doesn't matter. The school gets 100% of their funding that's budgeted. If in 2020 is a perfect example, because of COVID, our tax collection rate's way off. Doesn't matter. The school's going to get their funding. In New Jersey, a municipality is required to make up for the shortfalls in both tax collection and the shortfalls or the return of revenues that are lost in tax appeals filed by residents or property owners. So pilots, despite the discussion, does not impact school funding. Schools will always get their funding. There's no lost revenue due to uncollected taxes. That's entirely on the municipality's shoulders. Again, tax appeals. There's no revenue due to exempt status. Doesn't matter if properties are sold and change hands and they get approvals at our boards and they get tax exempt status for whatever reason. Doesn't matter. The school still gets their funding. There is no lost revenue due to any other circumstances. The schools get their revenue. So we can talk about whether or not we philosophically like a pilot, but you can't say that it's because the schools don't get their funding, and you can't say that it's not a successful tool that neighboring communities around us and all over the state aren't using to successfully rebuild their communities and prepare them for the future. So again, what do we get? I know I mentioned earlier all the towns that are around us that are doing these pilots. I can tell you, and you can call them because we have. They're not getting the public benefits that this township is getting as part of this project. Again, you could argue what you want about pilots. We said from the beginning, we would not even put a pilot to the council for consideration unless there was significant public benefit. We're gonna get 61 affordable senior citizen housing units. We're gonna get 64 additional affordable apartment units, not even close to meeting our requirement under the fair share housing, but it's 64 affordable units that we all know people in the community can use. 7,500 square feet of community space, whether or not that's senior citizen community center or library annex, 7,500 square feet. 10 Rooney Circle, the building, as well as the third floor rent. We're gonna get a new library, additional public amenity funding somehow. We're not sure what that number is. We're gonna get a new dog park and the 2 acres it's part of. The developer could have said, you know what, we want to put more units on that 2 acres. Instead, they're gonna give us the 2 acres and build the dog park. And again, 1.3 million, a little over that in new revenue, a net surplus of just under 700,000 in new revenue. And it's all at no cost to the township. It's all tied up in a very detailed plan that's fulfilling a lot of community needs and ultimately not going to cost the township money. So look, and we've talked about this the last time, you know, as complicated as things are sometimes before this council, even for, you know, small little community like West Orange, as complicated as you all know these issues can be, sometimes things come down to very simple decisions. It comes down to a simple yes or no. If despite all the work that's gone on, despite all the benefits, if you want to vote no, I get it. But understand that a no vote means those buildings are staying old and vacant office space. As if the office market wasn't in bad enough shape before COVID. In a post-COVID world, no one is going to invest millions of dollars into those office buildings. And even if they did, the likelihood that they would fill them is almost non-existent. Going to get major tax reduction. Let's not forget that. We haven't even talked about that. As part of this whole project, if you remember, there was a tax appeal settlement. These are old office buildings. And as we all know, whether it's fair or not, whether it's good news or bad news, property taxes are based on assessed value and values based on market price. They paid significantly less for this property than we have it taxed for. So if we vote no and all that gets scrapped, the township's on the hook for a significant tax reduction for what will ultimately be abandoned in office, vacant office space anyway. And not to mention the tax refund, because they're going to get a tax refund based on that tax appeal settlement going back several years. We're not going to get any of the new amenities. Forget the new library, forget the $3.1 million grant, forget the dog park, forget the new senior citizen housing, which we desperately need, forget the senior citizen community center, which has been talked about for years, forget the library annex, forget the intra-town shuttle to take people in and around town, all goes away. So as complicated as these deals are, simple decision. You vote no, I respect that, but that's what's at stake. You really can't spin it any other way. That's what's lost. We can go back to the drawing board, but that's ultimately what's lost. So you vote yes, we get a new center of town, we get a new residential complex, we get dog park, we get a new library, other public spaces, we're not really sure what they are yet, in the center of town, the geographic center of town. Hopefully alongside that construction, Essex Green finally gets to building out what they're already approved for. You get the new state-of-the-art library, again with a $3 million grant that other towns are begging for right now. We were in early. Dave and his crew put a great application together and got that approval. The dog park, I can tell you, maybe just slightly behind when can you pave my street? You know, dog park is one of the questions I hear more than anything from residents. And we're going to get not only the 2 acres of land, but they're going to construct a dog park for us. And ultimately might be the site for a great new and state-of-the-art animal shelter as well. We're going to new senior citizen housing. I mentioned earlier, we desperately need. And ultimately, even with the pilot, we're going to get the tax revenues that we're going to get. So look, sometimes, you know, we can drive ourselves crazy looking at details, but you know, ultimately, sometimes even small little towns, just one of 565 towns in Jersey, we all sometimes got to be dare to be bold. What is going to survive us and our service in this community? I know these are difficult decisions. The whole argument and discussion wrapped up in pilots is controversial. I get that, but let's not kid ourselves. We can argue the philosophical differences of whether or not we agree with a pilot, but let's not convince ourselves for 1 second that this project happens without it. The properties are old, abandoned, and no one's coming in there and doing all this stuff without a pilot. And I can tell you, they're certainly not going to give us all this stuff at the same time. So these are difficult decisions, but at sometimes, you got to be bold. Voting no is easy. We all know, whether it's in our private lives, our professional lives, or here in a public life, status quo is easy. It's really easy to just sit on the status quo and not have to answer questions and not lose sleep at night trying to think of these things. But you got to be bold. And Main Street was a perfect example where the township was bold. And old abandoned factories and warehouses that were, outdated, and although there were some tenants in there, was it really the best use? So the township was in early in the whole redevelopment world once the state created the legislation, and it was a bold move. Now, granted, there's been a lot of obstacles along the way, but rather than looking at the negatives, we should look at how we've overcome that. 4 years of legal challenges, almost a depression in the late 2009 into 2012 by the time it all settled. So, and yet it's still moving ahead. So maybe not as far as we want it to be, but sometimes you got to focus on the positive. We took a big chance back then, and we've got beautiful new apartments getting top dollar on our Main Street and what used to be a warehouse. So that's something we should be excited about. And that was a bold move for the government at the time. Liberty School, a lot of people who might be new to town might not realize that. Liberty School is a beautiful new school. That was part of a comprehensive development deal without a pilot, but that developer gave us 50 acres of land. Though a referendum approved the funding to construct the school, that was part of a big decision. And I can tell you, I was on the council. It was intense council meetings. That was big move, but they ultimately gave us 50 acres of land. And now we have a beautiful new school that we got land for free. Ridgeway Park was part of a comprehensive and detailed development deal that gave that land to the township. And ultimately we built Ridgeway Park. OSPAC was part of a development deal, which again was a bold move by the council at that time to get the developer to build OSPAC. It was built. It's a beautiful facility. It was built for free and donated to the town. And let's not forget Rock Spring. Most of this council was on the council at the time. Not many municipalities buy golf courses. There was a lot of people who were not in favor of that. But I think we can all agree that a short time later, not only looking at the number of rounds they're doing, but in what could have been, cleared land for a major development of affordable housing and significant number of units. We kept it a golf course and we preserved 140 acres. So I know these are difficult decisions. We all lose sleep over these things. We all do the best we can and what we think is what we think is best for the community. But sometimes these things take bold decisions. And I know this is a bold decision, but I don't think any one of you, even if you decide ultimately not to support this, can argue that what the township is getting in return is significant. And we can at least say, even if you decide to vote no, we can say to the public, we made sure we got a lot of stuff in exchange. And I can tell you, when you look at neighboring projects, we're getting a lot of stuff in return for this project at no cost. So that's it, Council President. I appreciate your time and the council's and the public's time. And obviously the administration is here to address any concerns and answer any questions. And ultimately, at some point when you open to the public, we're here to answer that as well.
Thank you, Mayor, for the presentation, and really want to acknowledge and thank you for having that quick crash course in the Aspire program. For the public and my council colleagues as well, this was part of included as a 1571, I believe is the bill number that is still before our legislatures. It is, a 1571. And in reading that, I realized that there were some benefits that would help developers, and it was Governor Murphy's way to incentivize developers to continue to build. And there are some issues with it, and reading through it, I did bring those concerns to the administration. So I'm grateful that they were able to, have that discussion. One of the programs that the mayor highlighted was the Aspire program, which would have given those developers who qualify reimbursements for certain financing gaps that they had. And my position, and this is in all transparency, my position was that if developers now or tomorrow are able to better benefit because of the financial incentives given by the federal and state governments, then that we should also better benefit our residents and the projects that we do. So I certainly want to thank the administration for taking the time to listen and investigate where we are with that. I want to, because I have had conversations with Mr. Hanley I want to open this up to the public for comments first, and then council can have a discussion if that's agreeable to all. I think after that presentation, if there are residents who want to have participation in public comment, if you can raise your hand and our moderator will start the time. Madam Moderator, are you?
I am. There's
Okay.
a few people that have queued up.
Yes, so I'm going to ask those residents, very much like we do during our traditional council meetings. Please, when you are given the floor, introduce yourselves by name and state your address. And remember that you will have 5 minutes to, that's at 4:56, but you will have 5 minutes to make your comments. So Madam Moderator, if you can please go to the first person who raised their hand.
Yes, it looks like it's Claire Silvestri. And hang on one second. Okay. Claire, if you could state your name for the record.
Sure, it's Claire Silvestri, 20 Grandview Avenue. Council President, I want to thank you for having this workshop meeting. Just a few questions, though. I did read the Chronicle it didn't arrive until Friday, and you mentioned that the first workshop meeting was going to be March 1st. This was announced on very short notice. I didn't see it publicized anywhere except for on the township website. There was no mention of it on Facebook. So I'm curious to know how many members of the public are actually on this meeting. I know that this is the kind of presentation that would usually be at the beginning of a council meeting when the council is considering one of these major projects in legislation. So it's a little bit tough that it came so much on short notice. And I must admit that I've been following this project since its inception back in 2017. And I found that this presentation was, the word that came to mind was dizzying. I found myself, I thought I knew this project, and I found myself feeling very off balance as to all the things that were being presented at once. So I just have a few questions. It certainly will not cover all of the questions that I have, but that popped up while I was watching the presentation. One of the questions was the $600,000 rent from the TSA that the mayor says will last till 2024. My recollection was in the previous iteration that the TSA had some kind of escape clause in their rental agreement. I wonder if that has been changed. Also, in the list of the library, the cost for the libraries that the mayor said was no cost, I noticed that there was, I believe it was a $1.5 million redevelopment bond, a RAB bond. And I'd like Mr. Hanley to explain to the public how that works, because it's my understanding that the taxpayers pay that back. So I don't really think that it's appropriate to position that as a no cost on the library building. And also, this has been a sticking point for me for some time, and I didn't get a chance to speak at the council meeting a couple of meetings ago about this whole idea of moving the library up to this and that the people who need to walk, who don't have access to public transportation, who like to walk to the current library location, will have the opportunity for a library annex. Tonight, Mayor Parisi talked about, oh, that 7,500 square feet could be a senior community center. It could be a library annex. I mean, that's all very pie in the sky. It's not very concrete. And to be perfectly honest, everyone is touting how wonderful and high tech the library will be at Rooney Circle. And this library annex is going to be, if it ever happens, will be a shadow of what's going on at Rooney. And I have questions about the jitney service that's going to be going all over town. Exactly who is going to pay for that? There were so many variables, so many what's the word I'm looking for? So many generalities in this project, all sorts of to make it sound like it's, you know, mom and apple pie. I think the bottom line is it's going to we're going to be giving up through the pilot a great deal of potential taxpayer revenue, and what we're getting in return is are things that would be nice to have, but not necessarily that we need to have. And one final point, when the mayor talked about the cost of the constructing the library had gone up significantly, partly is because when the architect came in, my understanding is an office building isn't designed to hold the stacks for the weight of stacks of libraries. So there's a lot of work that has to go into that building. And to put the animal shelter, again, we're looking at the animal shelter going into next to the stacks of the library on the lower level. It's just mind-boggling, certainly. And I wish the council members would take more time and table this tomorrow night and take more time to consider it and hear public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, for your comments. I've made some notes of the questions and we'll circle back at the end of public comment to respond. Madam Moderator, can you ask the next public speaker?
Yes, Mel Valdez. State your name and address for the record.
Hang on one second, Ms. Valdez. Madam Moderator, the timer, is that on?
Yes,
Okay,
Yes.
I didn't see it on.
I'll start it as soon as he states his
Okay.
name or
Ms.
her
Valdez,
name.
Please, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Meljulie Valdez. I'm a she, not a he. But thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to make my public comment. I do have,
Excuse me, can you state your address, please, for the record?
I live on Elm Street.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I do have a few comments. So I just learned about this meeting practically minutes before it was about to start. And when I was searching the township website, I couldn't find the information. So one thing that I do suggest is that you make this more accessible to residents by advertising this on multiple, social media or multiple platforms, because, it's important for us to be informed. And I'm glad that I was able to catch the information in time to be able to listen to the presentation. Also, I would like to know if there's going to be another workshop to allow more residents to be able to provide their comments. This presentation, I do like the first Claire who spoke initially. Yeah, there's a lot of what ifs and not many concrete details. I don't know if there are on the on the township website, or if someone could point me out to where I can find more actual details regarding this project, because there are a lot of what ifs and just a lot of things that still aren't making a lot of sense to me. Yes, a lot of these things sound great, the way the mayor presented it, but it's important to look at the little details and do your due diligence. The other thing that I would like to know about the TSA contract, yes, the mayor keeps on talking about this $600,000. I'm sure they're on a lease. When does this lease expire? And does it seem like they're going to renew? Because if this does expire in 2024, then that means that yes, this money, this rental income that we're banking on is only for a few more years. That's what 2024 is in 3 more years, and time does pass by pretty quickly. The other question that I do have is regarding the jitney. It sounds great that we want to make the jitney, and we want to make the library, if it does get moved, more accessible to residents. But then I would like to know, well, if the jitney is going to be transporting residents and going to be widely available, which I think right now it should be more widely accessible to all, what is the cost of that? Because, that wasn't one of the things that was spoken about. So, I will be emailing the township council and the mayor regarding, following up, because I would like to see more concrete information regarding this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Valdez. Madam Moderator?
I'm sorry, I'm working on Joe Krakowiak is up next.
Okay, well, let's just wait to reset the timer.
Yes. Sorry, it's,
That's okay.
Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, I'm just, hold on one second, Mr. Kukorvic. I'm just waiting for the
there
timer
you
to
go.
be reset. Okay, there it is. Hi, Mr. Kukorvic. Please state your name and your address for the record.
Great, thank you, Council President. Joe Krakowiak, Grandview Avenue. I appreciate the town council having this meeting tonight to further explore Executive Drive. And of course, I want to thank Mayor Parisi and all of the advisors. He remains a very strong advocate for this project and very impressive. Several questions. What did the town council and administration do to provide transparency about this meeting, this workshop meeting? I could find no social media or township email notice. Second question, why was the timing of this meeting moved up? 3, why is the decision on the animal shelter not made yet? And if that, in either case, whether that's added to the building or a separate standalone building is done, why wouldn't that involve significant additional costs? And are these costs accounted for in your pro forma? What exactly is the status of downtown redevelopment phase 2? It seems to me, if I recall correctly, that it's more than 2 years behind schedule. And do you know if the developer has obtained construction financing for phase 2, when of course we know they were unable to obtain construction financing for phase 1? Question 5, Mayor, when you say that this project can't get financing without a pilot, you're not saying that some other project could not be built without a pilot, correct? In other words, another project could be done without a pilot. It just wouldn't be this project. That's my understanding. Question 6, the library RABs of $1.5 million. How exactly are those repaid? And isn't it true that the RABs are repaid from the pilot so that funds from the pilot that would otherwise go to the town, like a typical pilot, are used to pay back the bonds? Is that understanding correct? How much will the, question 7, how much will the Jitney program cost and what are the source of funds? I didn't get a chance to look for a long time at the pro forma spreadsheet that was flashed up on the screen, but it looks like that the project as designed is going to result in the loss of more than $600,000 in town revenues from the implementation of a pilot, a loss of property taxes and the repayment of the RABs. Did I understand that correctly? Question 9. I agree with the mayor when he says that school districts will get their tax levy. And I think a lot of people can rest easy on that. But my question is, don't actual taxpayers make up for any shortfall from the pilot payment relative to what the redevelopers would be paying if they were paying property taxes? So in other words, the redevelopers' pilot payments are somewhat limited. And if school taxes go up more than the pilot payment, don't the other taxpayers or don't the taxpayers make up for this loss? Question 10. I just want to point out, and I agree with the mayor that the office buildings that are there have certainly been neglected, and that has been clearly proven in the redevelopment study and starved of renovations. But I would appreciate if he would address the issue of what happens if we don't agree to this pilot, because it seems to me based on my experience, that the owner of the property will not leave this property as is. They will renovate or build something different, or they'll sell it. They won't sit on this valuable property. And whatever they do without this redevelopment in the pilot, they will certainly be paying their share of property taxes. And we won't have to wait 30 years, as long as 30 years, for their pilot payments to actually meet the property taxes that they're supposed to pay. Mayor, do I understand that correctly? Thank you, everyone. It was, I'm sorry it took me the full 5 minutes, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kukoviac. Madam Moderator.
Yes. Please follow the prompts on your screen.
Hi, good evening. This is Joyce Rudin. Thank you for allowing my public comment. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear you. Thank you.
Okay, all right. I'm going to keep this fairly short. I agree with so many of the other comments.
Excuse me, Ms. Rudin, can you state
Oh,
your
sure.
address, please?
Woodland Avenue.
Thank you.
I agree with so many of the other comments that were made in regard to the lack of publicity for this hearing. I just found out about it about 10 minutes before it started. So I think that this was not a really good effort on behalf of the council, and the administration was not made to make sure that people really knew that this was going on tonight. I want to address one major issue, which is what the mayor said, and he said, quote, "No one is coming in without a pilot." I would like to know, how does he know this? Were studies done that this could not be sold or developed in another way? I'd like to know what is the basis of that statement, because so many people have said that this is a very valuable, centrally located parcel of land in a very desirable town, and that we could be getting top dollar for this. I think that if there was not a pilot, as this seems to be moving towards, we would get back the tax money rather quickly and be able to build our own beautiful library, and in an area that is convenient to the population that most needs it. So my main question is, why did the mayor say no one is coming in without a pilot? Thank you so much and have a good evening.
Thank you, Ms. Rudin.
Hi, yes.
Message from Claire. Madam
Okay.
Moderator, is Megan Brill.
There's I guess an old version that Mr. Redwine is using. So can you hear me now,
We can hear you, Megan. Are you?
Mr. Redwine?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you're good to go. If you state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. My name is Jonathan Redwine. I live at 10 Cobain Terrace. And I just want to say that I appreciate the opportunity that the council has provided in having this meeting. I think that the new format of having breakout meetings that are more focused on particular issues is an excellent way to allow the public to have a more in-depth understanding of the issues that the council is presented with. So I just wanted to express that. I'm interested to hear more about what the medium to longer term projection is in terms of impact on the value and the tax revenues that the property would attract, even with a pilot that is put in place at the outset of the project. And that's basically all I wanted to say. I appreciate the opportunity for the comment.
Thank you, Mr. Redmond.
Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak? Please raise your hands. I'm not sure how.
I see there is someone else that is.
There, yep, there is. They just raised their hand. I'm just trying to figure out how to take Mr. Redwine out of the panel, but I'll do that after we allow Gary Van Wyck. State your name and address for the record.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello, it's Gary Van Wyck, Burnett Terrace. Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
please proceed.
So, yeah, thank you for this really interesting presentation. It's always helpful to have the facts really condensed. And I recall how when Mayor Parisi gave the presentation on the golf course, that was extremely helpful for the public to focus on the issues and questions. Some of the questions that have been raised, I think, are also, very useful for the public to come to grips with. And it strikes me that it would be really useful for everyone if we could have something on the website that really went into the pros and cons, a bit like this slide presentation we saw here, but addressing the questions that have now been raised by the public, so that we can drill down deeper into the areas where there are still questions or concerns. And if that's publicly accessible, I think it would be really a great benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Wyck. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? Please raise your hand at this time.
I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay.
Oh, wait, somebody is raising. Oh, it's B. Valdez.
Is
I think
Not-
that's,
not the same person who spoke before?
I think.
No, my name is Betsy Valdez. It's not the same
Okay.
person.
Thank you. Let's reset the time and then Ms. Valdez, can you please state your name and your address for the record?
Sure, my name is Betsy Valdez and I live on Elm Street.
Message from Claire. Looks like Gary Van Wyck has changed his tune.
Ms. Valdez?
That wasn't me.
Okay, let's start her time over. I'm so sorry. Can we start her time over, Madam Moderator? Or we'll just add the seconds to the end. Go ahead, Ms. Valdez, sorry.
Okay, so thank you for letting me speak. I actually missed part of the presentation because I only heard through word of mouth that this meeting was happening. So I would like more transparency about when this meeting was planned, if it was moved at all, and why wasn't it posted widely. So from what I heard from my experience, things that sound too good to be true usually are. So, I heard that we're getting a bunch of things. We're getting a new library. But we do have a library and it's not properly maintained. We do have dog parks, but they also aren't properly maintained. So it's like this town likes to purposely let things run into the ground, but that's neither here or there. So with regard to the library, I just wanted to say a couple of things. So correlation isn't causation. So there was basically a data point about the utilization by the residents. So without taking into consideration the population and the current library selection, I don't think you can really say that the reason for the current utilization is based solely on location. It seems like that's more of an assumption. So I would like more information about how it was mentioned that the current utilization is based solely on location. Second, I've heard that this project, I heard multiple people say that this project is going to be in the center of town, but I'm not sure if that's taking into account the current elevation. So I would like more information on how that is being determined, because it would make, half of the town, it would be very difficult for half of the town to access the library if it were to be moved. I also heard that there would be a jitney for public access. who's paying for this jitney, and what's going to happen when the jitney can't run? Are you just going to tell residents, oh, well, and with regard to enrollment in schools, you said that the current enrollment is 70%. And that is no small number, and I don't think that we should be aiming for over enrollment. And I'd also, and I'd also like more information about, when it was said that this project can't be done without a pilot. I'm sure that if there was some other form of this project, it'd be able to be without a pilot program. So I don't know why, this push for a pilot just continues. And that is currently all of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Valdez, for your comments. Is there anyone else, any other member of the public that would like to speak during this portion of public comments?
I'm not seeing any.
Okay, I don't see any hands raised either, and just someone mentioned the number of attendees earlier. I know that this discussion was had with Lauren. I had this discussion with Lauren before, and I'm sure that when we resume our council meeting tomorrow, we'll be able to show the number of attendees, but currently there are 16 attendees. That was something that was mentioned before. I just don't know how to set that up, but I'm sure tomorrow we can do that. At this time, since there is no one else raising their hand for public comment, we will close public comment. And I think I want to start with first allowing the administration to answer those questions. If you were jotting down notes, if not, I have some notes to share. But we can start with the administration's response to some of those questions. Mr. Mayor, if you would like to start. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Council President. So I was writing frantically. I'm sure I missed a bunch, but I suspect you'll correct me. At some point, I will ask Mike to chime in on some more of the technical financial issues. So a couple things. There's a little talk about the lease. The lease expires 2024. We never said that would be a long-term lease, but 3 years at $600,000, that's real money. But even if the TSA were to leave, and if anyone's ever had a chance, although it's pretty secure, so I doubt you have, they've invested, and look, nothing's guaranteed anything. So let me just say that, there was a lot of comments about how we're assuming a lot of things. I get that. So nothing's guaranteed. We know that. But even if the TSA has invested significant money in that facility, that's one of their key training centers in this region. So is it possible they might bail? Yeah, but we think there's a good chance they won't because of the investment they've made in building out that space to accommodate a very specific need for the TSA agents they're training. However, nothing's guaranteed. If they leave, we get it. But if they leave, that's 25,000 square foot that maybe the school can take more space of. Maybe the town can move other departments there. Maybe we can just rent it and get rent. So I'm not saying that them leaving would ever be a perfect scenario, but nothing stays the same ever. So whether it's 3 years or 5 years, maybe eventually they were to leave, but we would have 25,000 square foot space that we could figure out what to do with it, whether as a landlord, whether a partnership with the school board. There's a lot of things that could be done there. So there's no doubt we never assumed, I mentioned in the presentation, it was only good to 24. We never assumed it would be forever. The fact is we're having this very conversation because nothing's forever. 20 years ago, Executive Drive was a bustling, thriving office complex. We're having this discussion because things change and we know nothing's guaranteed. As far as the animal shelter, we're not saying we have to move the animal shelter here, but for phase 2 redevelopment on Main Street requires the relocation of the animal shelter. So if that doesn't happen right away, we could always as a community decide to build a new animal shelter, especially in conjunction with the dog park, but we're under no obligation to. We have one. We could figure out some improvements down there that we would look to if this doesn't happen sooner than later. But again, phase 2 of the Main Street project requires the acquisition of that land of both the animal shelter and public works from the developer, from the project. So any introduction to the animal shelter on this space would be funded by that development moving forward. So we're not looking, there was some talk and some concerns about we're not showing where that money's coming from. We're not saying that's a given but if it does happen, the funding comes from phase 2 of Main Street redevelopment, which ultimately would require the relocation of the animal shelter. So that's the only reason that's part of that. And look, I said it briefly in the presentation. We know the first thought, and I think somebody mentioned it, having the animal shelter right next to the library stacks. First of all, it's not. When you look at this space and how it was designed on the first floor, there's roughly 2,000 square foot of hallway space, common space in between where we would conceivably put the animal shelter with a separate entrance. So because of the topography of the land, the main entrance is on one floor, which is ultimately the second floor, but the animal shelter would be around the back on a lower entrance with an entrance out to the parking lot. So it'd be completely separate from the library space, separated by 2,000 square foot of common area. And then again, like I mentioned, we spoke at length with the architect to decide, and is it conceivable to ventilate that properly and separate that from the noise. So we're not concerned about that ability, if in fact that becomes part of the discussion. Or again, and really some members of council was the ones who thought about, maybe if we're going to get a dog park, maybe that should be the home of the animal shelter, because it's ultimately on 2 acres of land with some parking. So it's much more open space. So a lot of options, but any discussion on the animal shelter is really only triggered by phase 2 of Main Street redevelopment going forward. And, there were some questions about that, but so that is like all of our lives, especially in COVID, the world's in metamorphosis right now. So phase 2 redevelopment was approved by council. The financing was approved by council to build about 170 townhouses. But, none of us have to be, real estate experts to know no one's really building townhouses right now. They're building apartments. And right now there's a lot of trepidation about even building more apartments until everyone sees what happens with post-COVID. Houses are going crazy right now in the market. So are apartments. People are relocating and moving. That's gonna slow down when we get out of COVID. So right now the owners of that project are trying to evaluate what's a better move. Councilman Rutherford wants to explore other options based on his context. We're going to discuss that. So phase 2 is in metamorphosis, just like everything else is. We're trying to figure out what's going to work. So that project, I think someone mentioned behind schedule. It's not behind schedule. These things are driven by the economy and by market forces that are way beyond the best of intentions from local government. So we're going to figure out what happens there. And if we figure out working collectively as a community what's good there in conjunction with the developer and the owner of the land, then we'll figure that out. And that might trigger the animal shelter being relocated. It might not. So that's, though, nice to consider as having space there. It's not a given right now. So if some of the information regarding the animal shelter was too vague, it's simply because we're just trying to plan ahead, knowing that phase 2 might trigger that. And so it has nothing to do with not getting the financing. They're trying to figure out what the best thing to do in building on that land. It's in a very changing economy and certainly very changing real estate environment. Mike can talk about some of the values of the taxes and the revenues in the pilot. There was a question about giving more information. We're going to prepare, the administration don't have it yet, Council President, and obviously we won't have it by tomorrow, but we're going to prepare a frequently asked questions, an FAQ, about this project. A lot of it will incorporate some of the discussion items tonight, and we'll try to get that to council and post it on the website in conjunction with the presentation just as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
So the jitney, look, and look, I mentioned it again, maybe I mentioned it too fast, or maybe because I think these things in my head, I don't say them clearly. We think a jitney, an intra-town jitney, it's not a new concept. The truth is, years ago, in summer months, the township had an intra-town jitney that would take people to the pool. Economic reasons eliminated that and prevented us from ever exploring it again, though it's been discussed. The reason why this project makes sense to do it, not only because we want to be able to transport people to the new library, but the library project of turning that into senior building, the developer on that approved project had to apply and get a tax credit from the state of New Jersey to fund that. One of the requirements was that he fund a transportation component. So we don't know what those dollars are now. We could probably tell you roughly what we spend to operate one of our jitney buses. It's, you know, maybe 70 grand, 80 grand, not a fortune, but, you know, a real dollar amount. So we just don't know what his contribution has to be until we get to that point. But so we know there'll be a town component, but that project requires it funded by the developer, funded by that project. So a significant part of the funding is already going to be provided by that project, and ultimately the town can kick in the rest. Again, not minimizing that, but something the township's talked about for a lot of years. And we all, I think, agreeing or not agreeing with this project, can see the benefits of having an intra-town jitney, whether it's to take people to the zoo or to the pool or to the library. You know, there's a lot of neat things in town that maybe people who either don't want to drive or don't have access to a car could take advantage of. So a lot of these things, and I guess some people had concerns about the clarity of the project. Some of these things are, you know, maybe just conceptual. Nothing's guaranteed. We could dissect things for days and days and weeks and weeks and weeks and not be able to answer every question. We know some of these things are moving targets because they're going to be driven by forces outside of our control. But I say again, if it wasn't for this concept, I know we all want to think that, okay, developer bought the land. Remember, and people are concerned about the cost the pilot's going to have on this. You know, Mike Hanley or Rich Train can talk a little bit later on about some of the dollar amounts, but they paid half of what we had the property assessed at, which means the taxes are going to get cut in half, period. So people are concerned the pilot's going to cost it that money. No, if this project doesn't move forward, they have an automatic appeal that it is undefendable. They bought the property for half of what we had assessed. So how can we convince the court that our assessed value is justified? It's not. So we can talk about lost tax revenue. There's the township, if this project doesn't go anywhere, is going to have to cut the taxes significantly. And on top of that is going to have to refund millions of dollars to this property owner on the back years of these tax appeals since he bought the property. So that's a frustrating part of government. Council discusses that every year budget time, trying to make up for these dollars, especially when we have to be on the hook for it completely. School board doesn't pay on tax appeals, neither does the county. We have to budget for that. But this is a significant one that we have no defense of. So it was part up and tied up in the settlement agreement, which is the only reason why, you know, the owner of the property isn't breathing down our neck to settle this. But if the project doesn't get approved, that's the first thing he's going to do. Then as a developer, he'll make decisions as to what can be built there. And look, there's no doubt it's great property, but no one's building office space. So I know people want to say he made the investment. Yeah, he made the investment because he thought it could be repurposed and more profitable. That's America. God bless them. But if we can see a benefit to the community, that's part of our job. And ultimately, part of our job is to see a betterment of the community. We could disagree on the merits of the project, and Mike can talk more specifically about it, but I just think we're talking about pie in the sky. I think someone said pie in the sky. It's pie in the sky if you think someone's coming in and building this without this project and without the components and the financing agreement. They're just not. So that's why all those projects I mentioned about neighboring towns, they're all funded with pilots. So yeah, people made investments and they could lose on those investments. But if this doesn't happen, besides settling the tax appeal, it's going to cost us millions and a significant reduction in revenue moving forward. Most likely, if that developer doesn't see this project happening, he might sell the property. And I can tell you what, I'm not a realtor. Ms. Williams can probably comment on that, Councilwoman Williams. But what he paid $15 million for, without an approved project in a post-COVID office market, he'll probably be lucky if he gets 10. So there's another tax reduction and another tax appeal that's not defensible. So I know these things are complicated and we all take some of this for granted because we're living it. But I don't want the pilot to be the curse here because, and Mike can talk more about it, it's the impetus that moves the project forward because on its own, we can't sustain the value that we're charging them for it. And the market certainly isn't going to support renovating office space knocking it down and building new office space. So, Council President, I might have missed some. If there's specific things you'd like me to speak on, please ask me, and I'll do the best I can.
Sure, I think that you answered most of the Jitney questions, the library questions, and I know that there are some questions that Mr. Hanley is going to be able to respond to, but I just got a notice from Councilman Rutherford that he has to leave the meeting early, so I'd like to give him the opportunity to jump in at this time, if you're ready, Councilman.
Thank you, Council President. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I apologize to the public and to my colleagues for having to leave this meeting. This is very important to me. But as you know, we originally had this scheduled for next week. And as of February 18th, this meeting was still not confirmed. And I had already communicated to Council President that I could not attend fully tonight. So while I do apologize, I am deeply disappointed that we've even had this meeting tonight. Notice was mentioned by several of the residents during public comment. I am not sure that this was properly noticed. And so I'm really disappointed with that, because this is the kind of conversation, this is the kind of workshop, the kind of meeting that I think we need. And I think when we have more of this, we can have less dissent. I think when we allow people to express themselves and be at the table, or at least feel that their voices are being heard, then we have less of the resistance to certain projects. And when we approach it from a place of trying to provide as much opportunity as possible to all of those various voices, I think we get better outcomes. So I do have to express my disappointment. I do want to share a few words with you with regard to this project before I go. Couple of things said in the presentation. 300 Executive Drive was mentioned several times. Says it's just slightly above 50% occupancy. I think it's at around 55%, and no one would say that that is a good number. But in a post-COVID or in a COVID world, that is an excellent number, and it shows that they have, by making that investment in the building, they have positioned themselves well for a post-COVID environment. They're at 55% occupancy now at the peak of the pandemic. And so my expectation and their expectation is that when COVID is done, their occupancy rates will go up and they will be more competitive with their neighboring office parks than they would have been had they not made that investment. Traffic was mentioned. I'd like to know if we've done any traffic studies at all. I understand the volume of traffic created by the office park, but I would like to know if we've done any, or if we are planning to do any traffic studies to determine what the impact would be on Essex Green and the surrounding corridors. I know that it was said that we should not deny zoning based on an increase in students in our schools. And let me back up for 1 second. I do want to thank our mayor for providing all of this information. Whether we agree on the details or not, I am grateful that we had the opportunity to share this. I wish it was being recorded. I'm not sure that this meeting is recorded, but this is the kind of presentation that allows people to get their thoughts and feelings out, even when we disagree. It was said that we cannot deny the zoning based on an increase in the school population, but I think that is still something that we should consider when we're discussing the merits of a project. And everyone wants to attract new families, but that attraction should not be based on new housing, or solely or predominantly based on new housing. It should also be based, or predominantly be based, on the amenities that families need, and that we're competing with our neighboring towns over. The library is a significant asset given to the town. And I think as it is envisioned now, while I don't agree with the move to Executive Drive, it is a beautiful property. I've seen the architectural renderings. I think all of us on the call have. And there's no question that that would be an awesome space and much better than the current library. But we cannot say we're getting it for free. There are two things that we need to discuss. One are the RAD payments. I think with regard to the the senior building or one of those projects, it's 1.5 million. I think with Executive Drive in general, it may be 4.5, and I could be wrong, but I know there's a different number, or at least I've seen a different number with regard to the RAB bonds. Those are bonds that the township is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the township will borrow that money, use the money for the purpose of improving the project one way or another, whether it's infrastructure or whatever. And then we will then repay those bonds out of the pilot payments that the developer is making in lieu of paying the property taxes. So while we have a source of revenue identified to repay the bonds, that source of revenue is based upon the success of the rental scheme that the developers have. And at least initially, I believe the town is on the hook for borrowing the money.
I mean, do you want that answered now or not?
No, I'm sorry. I wish I could.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mike. I appreciate your help.
Yeah,
and
no, it sounded in the form of a question. I apologize for interrupting.
No worries. And I will say too, Mr. Hanley has been very helpful in spending his time and walking through some of this stuff. So, and I'm grateful for that. I think that's important.
Yeah, sorry, Councilman.
No worries. We were comparing Becker Farm Road to Executive Drive. And I think we have to, I don't think that that's a very fair comparison. Becker Farm Road lost Lowenstein Sandler, which was one of their major tenants. Lowenstein made a decision to relocate, and that affected Becker Farm Road, and then COVID hit. So, it is a confluence of events. I don't know that that's quite a fair analysis. When we talk about the rent that we could potentially get from the tenant at 10 Rooney Circle, roughly 600,000 per year, we need to also consider what our expenses are against that rent. It's not as if it's a $600,000 profit, at least the way that I've read it so far or understand it so far. It's not a $600,000 profit. It's $600,000 in revenue, and then there are some expenses associated with it, and that has to be considered as well. I could probably list a few more, and I do. I have all the notes from all of the commenters and some additional notes on this meeting, but unfortunately I do have to go. But I do want to thank you for the opportunity to speak out of turn. Mr. Mayor, I do appreciate the opportunity to address some of these concerns, and I will send an email to my council colleagues and to the mayor with the rest of my notes. Thank you, everyone, for your graciousness tonight.
Thank you, Councilman Rutherford. And before we proceed to answer any additional questions for the public, I feel like I need to clarify the fact that there was no intent to not notify the public. I know that Madam Clerk did notify via the newspapers that are designated for such notification, and the information was posted online on the township website in advance. I believe it was actually notified even before we had the Zoom link, as the township was trying to make sure to give enough notice as they were organizing the Zoom platform itself. And so I want to just be clear that there was sufficient notice. And yes, we did discuss during our last town council meeting that a March 1st date would be appropriate, because that's what the administration asked for. When the administration asked us to move the meeting, I cannot make these decisions alone, and in concert with my council colleagues and their availability and everyone else's availability to participate tonight, the meeting was moved. So there is no ill intent in not being transparent. Clearly, we are hosting these to increase that level of transparency and public participation. So apologies for not having it posted on social media. I'm typically on social media. This week I have not been, so my apologies, but look forward to others in this regard. Mr. Hanley, if we can go back and talk about, can you please, let's start with the RAB bond, since that is something that everyone, several people have mentioned tonight. Can you express what a RAB bond is and how is that paid? And in this particular project, how that works?
Sure. So, I mean, it's always difficult to communicate really complicated transactions to, create a summary that everyone listening to it understands. And you had 33 slides here, so that's super hard. And I get that. But if you look at the slide called annual revenue projections, which we all saw, it was crystal clear that the RAB payment was being deducted from the revenues that was coming in. And the township is still getting $1.3 million in new revenue that it won't get if we don't do this. So the RAB bond also is not something we're at risk for. It's the project is totally at risk for that RAB bond. So I think it is an excellent use of dollars. And I mean, if I can globally like step back from the whole thing, that's why redevelopment laws exist. It's to take properties that are not performing, that you're continually losing money on. And we lost money on tax appeals before on this property, and then we lost money on more tax appeals on this property. And there is not a person around that thinks Class B office space is a growth industry right now. It wasn't before COVID, and it's worse today. We negotiated super hard, the administration, over probably more than a year to get to the deal that we had when this was originally approved. And I can tell you, one of the things that our adversaries said was, like, it's super risky to develop in West Orange because you always have litigation. They were right. And so now they've spent money for another year. We've spent money for another year. And it's still an excellent deal. It's a better deal than when we started. And the developers lost a lot of money in that time. So, but we don't actually care about the developer. But we negotiated a deal that is the very best deal the town could get and still get the project built. And that is our goal in the context of these things. And the mayor, I thought, described very well all the benefits of this project. But we had to do things to make it happen. And no one should consider revenue not collected from conventional taxes as a lost revenue to the town, because the project does not happen. That was another slide that the mayor, presented to the whole community. Many of the surrounding communities are using this same tool, not because any council person in any of these towns wants to help a developer. Like, zero of them do. None of you have ever sat up there and said, I want to give money to a developer. But what you do say is, when I put together a package and I'm going to create more dollars to my current residents that don't have to be raised from the existing taxpayer. And then most people don't get to say this, but I get an asset that I can use for any number of things, including a library. I'm getting a dog park and possibly an animal shelter. Those are tremendous give backs to a municipality that costs far more for us to build than to get for what amounts to nothing. So at the end of this project, the municipal taxpayer is going to pay less dollars than they would otherwise pay. And that's because government's a toll good. The base cost of government doesn't change at all based on the number of residents that you put in a town at the town size of West Orange. You're already providing public safety. We talked about this last time around, and the chief spoke, and Jack Sayers, who knows this well, super well, spoke very eloquently on the fact that the public safety we provide is going to be provided regardless of what's there. And in fact, our experience with Edison Battery was it's costing us less time and energy of our police and fire now that it's redeveloped than it was when it was undeveloped. So, well, basically the cost of government doesn't go up. We're going to add over $1.3 million to our budget that doesn't have to be raised from today's taxpayer. And that will either lower the taxes that they would otherwise pay or provide amenities that can't be provided today. And both of those are a good thing for the residents of West Orange.
Mr. Hanley, thank you for that. Can you speak to, and I know I didn't pose this question to you in advance of now, so if you don't have the answer, I'm hopeful John Gross may have the answer. But with respect to the income, the revenue, the tax revenue that's generated by 300 at 50% capacity versus what this project is expected to generate. Can you draw the comparisons as far as where we are now and where we look to be?
I mean, the taxes on 300 right now are about 117,000. And this project's gonna pay 1.2 million.
I'm sorry, someone turned on the blender back there, so.
Do we all get a daiquiri? Something?
My husband's making dinner tonight. So you were saying it was $117,000 is what 300 Rooney is paying currently.
Yes, and the pilot for this project will be $1.2 million.
Did you go? I certainly, I was going to call on my council colleagues if they had questions. Councilwoman McCartney, I saw your hand go up, and then Councilwoman Castellino.
Thank you, Council President. Mayor, I really appreciate this presentation. I'm grateful for this workshop, and I'm glad you had a chance to come up for air, at least take a breath after that presentation chock full of information. Mike, it was nice to see you again. I think similarly along the same lines, but you're talking about 300. I wanted to know, we keep hearing this argument about losing tax revenue, but in an area in need of redevelopment, we should be comparing the existing conditions and the taxes that are being generated right now to what's being projected. So on 100 and 200, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but do you or John have the numbers of what the existing conditions are generating now?
Sure. So the existing taxes are 306,000.
For both properties.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, I mean, we can read it line by line, but if we start with what we're sitting here today and look at all the new revenues that come in and subtract the existing taxes and the RAB payments, the net benefit to the West Orange taxpayer is over $1.3 million.
Right. Yeah, that was in one of the mayor's slide, but I didn't see the existing, what was there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was there. And the, like, I mean, you know, like as I said, it's super hard to deliver 33 slides and make everybody understand all the detail that's in them.
Yeah.
And I know that, you know, another thing that is like a constant attack on government is that it works too slowly. So, you know, this government is reacting to a timing problem. And unfortunately, that is accelerating the schedule as to how we might want to do things. But being proactive and trying to avoid problems that are coming and having special meetings, you know, that's good government. And I work in, you know, probably 100 towns. And I can't think of a town that has more special meetings and special presentations around the things they do than West Orange. So you know, at the risk of sounding obsequious, this, like, that's my experience over a decade of doing this. And
Mhm.
this meeting didn't, you could have just introduced it tomorrow at your council meeting and not had a special workshop.
Right. And Mike, you saw in the mayor's first slide that this timeline has been going on since 2017. So, it's not, we are not just being introduced to this.
Right.
This, this is an amendment to what we were originally introduced to, but we have been looking at this for quite some time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Castellino.
Thank you, Council President. Mike, thanks for talking about those tax appeals. We have to keep going back to them. There's a lot of great pluses we're getting with this project. But again, to my colleague's point, just what the property is worth now, the appeals that will go through, the loss of revenue. My background as a title officer, traveling the state, facilitating commercial loan closings. Prior to COVID, the these commercial buildings were becoming vacant at a very, very rapid rate. And now it's COVID. I know my kids, they're working from home. They don't plan on going back anytime soon. So I think this is a great opportunity for us. Becker Farm Road, I've been in there 2 years ago, and there were so many vacancies then. I go to 300 Executive Drive to see a client, and again, they've been advertising, they've been trying to get clients in, it's renovated. It's a tough market right now. It's a really, 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 really tough market, and it's only going to get tougher. So we could easily say, what could it be? What we could get full pricing for it. I think Ms. Rudin, you mentioned, how does the mayor know? I was council president last year. I got phone calls all the time from developers. They all want a pilot because with the COA obligations, affordable housing obligations, they all are asking for pilots because they have to meet those obligations. What's great about this project on both ends, it satisfies obligations of 65 at this site, 61 down off Mount Pleasant Avenue. So that's a great opportunity for us to eat up those obligations, because once those obligations are eaten up, that's less new developers coming in that we could get full revenue from. So, these are all good things. Traffic, I'm not concerned with. I remember 15 years ago when Essex Green would be buzzing Christmas Eve on a Wednesday when even everybody was still working in the offices. There was never issues, with traffic. That may be the one day that there were issues with traffic when it would be real busy then. And I hope we have those problems again up at Essex Green. But again, it wasn't a problem then because the traffic functioned. Dave Kuby has been tirelessly, interviewing patrons of the site, the current site of the library. And, there's not many walkers. We keep talking about walkers, and we're going to try to satisfy that need. But, again, another plus, a computer lab could be created here at this space. Books could be ordered, sent down. There's just so much opportunity. So I'm really excited. I spent the summer explaining to many folks at their doors when I was campaigning, people understanding the project. So I think it's important that tonight that we do put up on the website this presentation, and thank you, Mayor, it's very thoughtful. But I think we need to get it up for folks. I myself thought the meeting was going to be March 1st, but then again, it wasn't etched in stone because we had to make confirmation. So Council President, I appreciate you, reaching out to us to get us available for tonight. And I think we're trying to be very transparent on this. The only thing I would add, Mayor, is I would like, and I appreciate, because I had mentioned to you about the the animal shelter moving over to the, to where the dog park is at. And I would definitely push for that because I'd rather see that space in the building be reserved for a renter. You know, that's revenue. So if the animal shelter's there, that's not revenue for us. So I think I really would have to insist that that dog shelter, the animal shelter be outside the building, because that is an opportunity for us for revenue. And I think the more revenue that we could generate in that building, I mean, that's an asset. That is a golden asset for us. Like right now, the building is worth anywhere from 6 to 8 million. Once it's renovated, you're looking at an $18 million asset for the township with renters. So I see a lot of positives. Mike, I you know, again, explaining that RAB, thank you, bond, because it is get confusing for the public. And I think if maybe even Mr. Gross could put something out there to even enumerate the tax appeals a little bit better, or if Mr. Trank wants to talk about them. But I think the public really fully needs to understand how, if we don't move forward on this project, you know, the loss of revenue there, and that's immediate, if I'm understanding it correctly. So thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
President, can I just address the one point?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, please.
Just Councilwoman Castellino mentioned putting the presentation up. We're not trying to stall, but if it's okay with the council, we'd really rather prepare an FAQ to go along with the presentation.
Okay.
I know like these bullet points kind of were clear to us because I was talking about them, but I think if you're just reading it cold, some of it might be a little confusing. So I just ask for a day or two to address some of the questions raised tonight, but also try to put an FAQ together about that before we post it, just so it's a little bit more comprehensive. And just one more point, Council President, I'll turn it back to you. There's a couple of comments about traffic. I know Councilman Rutherford mentioned it. I should have mentioned it in the presentation, but an approved plan by this council at tomorrow night's meeting and ultimately March 9th, doesn't mean this project doesn't have to go to the planning board. It would still need site plan approval. So issues like traffic, design, all that stuff, that would still have a full hearing as required by law before our planning board. So this council approval, if it is approved, doesn't forgive those obligations this project would have. So things like traffic studies, design elements and all that stuff, that would still have to be vetted out before the planning board.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilwoman Williams, did you have a question or a comment that you wanted to share?
Thank you, Council President. I don't necessarily have any questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Hanley, for your extensive information this evening. It was extremely helpful. Did want to respond. I understood that there was commentary. I did check on the township website. It is the third item listed, this special meeting here tonight. I don't know when it was posted, but it was there for everyone's availability. Did not hear a response to one of the questions that was asked by a speaker about the TSA lease located on the third floor through 2024. There was some inquiry about an exit clause that they may or may not have. So I just wanted.
So I can answer that. You know, it's normal in federal leases to have ability to terminate them. It can be terminated on 180 days notice. But they also have an option to 2031, which they put in because they want it. And as I don't recall who stated, they've spent a large amount of money to fit out the space, and we don't know what they're going to do, but you know, we'll have to be nimble. I mean, this is an example of government doing things that make sense, but you know, you can't guarantee the future. I will say having the option to 2031 is something that we should consider with equal value as the fact that they have an ability to terminate, which is in basically all.
Well, I was going to say that's a clause that's in every type of lease agreement, but with the option to that long in the future, that's definitely a plus. I'm certain they did that so that they could lock in some rates and not have to deal with increased rents. So that's a good thing to hear. I'm glad that that question was asked so that we could bring out the fact that that is included. Again, I didn't have any questions. Thank you so much for your time. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilwoman Williams. I wanted to go back just to a couple of points as I'm going through reading the notes that I took. There was a comment that was made with respect to the cost, the increase of the cost of the library having gone up significantly. And there was reference made to the weight bearing on the floors because it's not technically supported. However, I just wanted, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I wanted to go back to the library's presentation where they did discuss the weight bearing capacity of the floors, which is why they put the stacks of the larger stacks, the library stacks on the bottom level, which is, you know, coming in through the front of 10 Rooney, that's the second floor. There will be stacks there, but of a shorter scale, and both for the weight and for visibility to be able to see through. But so the larger stacks are going to be in the basement, if you will, floor. And I'm calling it a basement. It is not a basement, it is a lower level or the first floor. So correct me if I'm wrong, are we expending any additional monies to support or bolster the weight?
Council President, no, that was not a correct statement. I think the increased cost as we went through this process was more a matter of increased costs, adding some things, you know, sitting down with an architect. And how many of us have said we would spend $5,000 to renovate a bathroom and you spend 18, you know? So I think this was a matter of going through the formal process that had not yet been undertaken when we first had this discussion. It was the architect hadn't been retained to go into the details. So simply when they finally sat down with the space and designed it with all the things they wanted and all the things that made sense, the cost increase. And again, a lot had to do with, you know, pretty substantial outdoor space that was not originally part of the discussions. But when the architect looked at the land, looked at the topography and how it tapered down to the lower level, he was right in designing a beautiful outdoor space that takes you out through that lower level onto the parking lot, again, blending it into the topography. So it had nothing to do with the engineering of the building. It had to do with when you finally sit down and add all these things up and add all these design elements that everyone wanted to see, it simply was more than we were guessing at the first time because that process had not been completely undertaken and completed.
And I would add the construction costs are generally under pressure post-COVID. The cost of construction has gone up since we did this for almost all materials. So, and I think every engineer knows the pressure that large amounts of books put on the floor. And that probably was considered at the beginning, although I didn't have any of those conversations. It's not super high level engineering.
Council President, I don't want to speak for the library. Dave and his board of trustees and the architect can speak for themselves, but this was all part of a grant application. So I'm not saying that they put all the extras in, figured to see what they get from the grant, but there's probably an element of let's put it all in and see what we get. And again, I mentioned earlier and in passing, but we got 100% of our requests. So if like other towns, we got less than the 100% of our request, I'm sure the architect would have worked with the trustees and pulled some of those things out. But to their credit, they put a good application and a good plan together and the state approved 100% of the requests. So as a matching grant, that put the cost at 6.2. So
Yeah.
a lot of that was putting in extras that they wanted to see if they can get, and they got. So if this were to happen, we're going to have the library that the director and the trustees ultimately wanted.
And I would add, this is another reason why time matters in the world and why, you know, what you all are doing by having special meetings quickly and trying to act quickly to throw away $3 million that the state's willing to invest in your town is, you know, I mean, the possibility of losing that is not great. You know, that's money that could be set on fire forever. And so sometimes you have to do things more quickly than you might want to, but $3 million is a good reason to do that.
So thank you for bringing up, that was going to be my next point. I know that a lot of the, some of the commentators wanted to know, including Councilman Rutherford, why the need to have the meeting pushed up a week. Whereas we were supposed to be, we agreed to meet on the 1st and the administration asked us to meet sooner. I'm going to say that I saw on the mayor's presentation the resolution that's going to be on for and the ordinance on first reading tomorrow. So can you elaborate as to the significance of having pushed up this meeting, the timeline with the library grant, and any extensions that have to come as a result of council action? I don't know if Mr. Trank or
Thank you, Council President. And I do want to go back to the comment you made about the stacks, because the council approved at the administration's request to hire an engineer. And an engineer did exactly that analysis and got to the conclusion that you summarized. So that analysis was done so that this will be a safe structure for the new library based upon, as you said, the configuration of the stacks. Specifically, yes, Council President, I shared with you that March 1 was and is the deadline that we had to show site control, that we would be able, number one, to have the matching, and number two, to have the site. That's why initially, there's a new state librarian. Initially, Mr. Kuby had reached out and said, we need some more time because we have issues and we're trying to finalize everything. And he was told that the state librarian did not feel there was the possibility of an extension. It is my understanding at that point, the mayor reached out to Assemblyman McKeon and I think reached out to his liaison with the governor's office. And as a result of that, they said, if we get a resolution, well, they also said if you showed them a bank account with the 3.1 in, they'd accept that. But they said in lieu of a bank account, Mayor Parisi was not willing to show us that. But in lieu of that, they would take a resolution from the council that outlined our pathway forward. So as the mayor indicated, that is one of the actions that's on for tomorrow night. Again, it's not a bond resolution. It doesn't commit any financing, but it at least will prove so that we can keep this grant money available, that we are moving forward with this sequence that is critical to show the matching and to show site control. Site control won't exist until March 9th. Again, assuming you approve tomorrow, March 9th will be when you'll have second reading of the financial agreement and you will have the redevelopment agreement, which will basically contain the commitment by the current owner and the redeveloper to transfer 10 Rooney to the township at no cost, assuming all of the approvals are forthcoming.
Thank you, Mr. Trank. And is that the reason why also on our agenda is the conditional redeveloper? Can you talk to that, please?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for bringing that up. So as you know, you can't negotiate with a redeveloper until you have an area designated as an area in need of redevelopment. You did that on December 15th, and until you have a redevelopment plan, which you approved on second reading on February 9th. Because we have to give notice and it's 20 days, that won't be, it's not a leap year. So March 1 would be the 20 days, or February 29th, March 1. So by approving a conditional redeveloper, and you saw that it has a time life and whatnot, we can then between tomorrow night and March 9th, obviously, hopefully quicker, finalize the intricacies of that redevelopment plan, including the mayor's request for some additional support for some of these other aspects of 10 Rooney. So that's why it's conditional. It's subject to evaporating if we don't reach a deal and if you don't approve it, more importantly, but it allows us to finalize or continue or finalize the negotiations.
Thank you for that explanation, Mr. Trank. I want to go back to Mr. Hanley. You and I had conversations about this a year ago, if not more, when we were first discussing executive drive. And I just looked at a note, Councilman Rutherford mentioned the fact that it wasn't a fair comparison, and I'm summarizing, not quoting, to compare redevelopment projects with pilots with Roseland, because Roseland's situation was unique in as much as they had a tenant, a large tenant leave. Can you talk about the comparison to Roseland, their tax rate versus all of our neighboring tax rates, and why are we the same, similar, or different in that regard? Why is it fair to make an assessment and compare?
Well, I mean, I think I would start by saying we can make a comparison across the whole 280 corridor, Route 46. It doesn't matter whether you're in Roseland, Parsippany, West Orange. We have seen millions of square feet of office space come offline and be repurposed because there's not enough tenants. And this type of office space, I mean, the Lowenstein-Sandler office space is in better shape than office space that's chopped up in 3,000 or 5,000 square foot spaces. So I have to respectfully disagree with the councilman that it's a bad comp on that basis. And I mean, like, I can tell you an office project like this that didn't need a pilot, but it's in the Hanover Township, and their effective tax rate is about 1%. You know, it's one of the lowest tax rates in the state.
Can you compare that tax rate to our tax rate, just for the benefit of the public?
Yeah, sure. I believe our tax rate is around 3%, but I'll get you the exact number.
Yeah, I think that could be also something that we include on our FAQ for the residents. I think it's important for us to understand how there are some projects that can be done without pilots and why there are some that cannot be. So I think that that's important to include.
100%. I mean, when you get to Florham Park and Hanover Township, places with tax rates that are 1%, that is effectively a pilot already. They're super low tax rates. And so it changes the math for everyone. But when you're, you know, almost any municipality in Essex County, you're just providing more services. Land is more expensive. There's more density. Your schools cost more, and your effective tax rate is meaningfully higher. And as a result, the economics of projects change. And I can tell you, in Hanover Township, they didn't get a library, and they did not get a dog park. They did not get all those givebacks from the developer that we're getting in this conversation. And everyone has to do their own cumulative math to work that out.
I do want to share with the public and with my council colleagues, some of us have had these conversations. I know I had them with Councilman Rutherford when we visited the library for the library presentation. In looking at the grant awards from the state to our local neighboring communities, and I was very jealous of this, Maplewood got $8 million for their library. I wish we would have asked for more and maybe gotten a little more, but I also want to say that in my conversation with Councilman Rutherford, I let him know that in addition to the 8 million, hi Councilman, in addition to the 8 million that Maplewood received from the state grants, they also bonded a little over 10 million. So I know that there was a comment made by someone earlier in public comment with respect to improving our existing library and not letting these things run into the ground. The problem with that existing library is the parking. There's nowhere else to expand except to go up. And to build a library on our own, I think someone else mentioned that we could do that. Are we, and I pose this question to Councilman Rutherford, are we willing and ready to bond $18 million or $15 million to build a library? That's, also a consideration. But, when we have the ability of a property what we don't have to, bond another 10 million for, I think that is a consideration we have to make. And then I want to go back to the mayor when someone asked, how does the mayor know that no one is coming in to do a project without a pilot? The question was, what's the basis for that statement?
Oh, just to
Maybe
supplement.
I can do the, I'm sorry, Richard.
I just want to supplement what Mr. Hanley said. I called for a lifeline, and Mr. Gross could probably, the tax rate for West Orange for 2020 was 4.284%. So
Yeah, no, I'll throw some extra color on that. The Roseland effective tax rate was 2.14%. And 61% of our tax rate, which is just the school board, is 2.23%. So the school portion of West Orange's tax rate is greater than the entire Roseland tax rate on an effective tax basis.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Trink, for that.
And-
Mayor, do you want to
Do-
go ahead?
Can I take the why they made a pilot question?
Oh, you can, sure.
Unless
Council
you-
President, can I take the anecdotal reply and then Mike can give the expert opinion?
Okay, let's go in that order then, anecdotally.
So look, I'm not a developer. I'm not a finance guy, but I can tell you, and I think Councilwoman Castellino alluded to it, and Mr. Trank, Mr. Sayers, Chief Abbott, Mr. Gross, they're all at nearly all these same meetings. Any developer who comes in about any property, the first thing they ask for is, will the town give a pilot because the project's not possible? So I don't know the real estate business, but if I had questions, I'd ask Councilwoman Williams. I'm not a developer. I don't know the developer business, but when every developer says the same thing, I'm going to assume they know how these projects work and how they don't. And to Mike's point, when you look at the Essex County tax rate, it's difficult to fund these projects when you have an inherent land cost that is significant compared to the Sussex counties or the Warren counties or even parts of Morris County. So when you have that basis and then you're asking for a major investment, and then on top of that, as we do with every developer, we're looking for givebacks on top of that, the project's not viable. And I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had with developers over the years that ended real quickly as soon as we said, there ain't gonna be a pilot. So I don't want to sound ignorant, but there's got to be something to that because they're the guys coming to the table with the expertise. And as soon as they know they can't get a pilot, they walk away. So when you look at the land costs in Essex County, in West Orange specifically, and the tax rate, they have a huge basis before they even get started. And like I mentioned, when the second word's out of our mouth, or what are you going to give us in return, makes the project difficult to finance. So I can only speak to my years as mayor and even as council before that. It's the first thing they ask for, and when they can't get it, they walk away. I can point out properties and properties and properties over the years. They're still not developed because the first thing they ask for is a pilot. We tell them no, and they walk away.
Thank you,
Mike, you want to give the more official reason than that?
Yes, Mike, please.
I thought you covered it. No, I mean, we negotiate to the lowest yield that is financeable for the developer, and we believe we're at that on this project. This project has a yield about 6%, which means the net income divided by the project cost is in that range, and that's where projects are supposed to be to get funded, to get enough debt and attract returns for equity. But, you know, I think the mayor described it well. When you look around at your peers and everyone's doing the same thing, like that sends a signal to you. If they can't be done in Bloomfield and South Orange and Montclair and Verona and Roseland without pilots, then, you know, why would we think it's something different here? I mean, you have to let, even if you don't believe what I'm saying, you have to let the balance of the evidence lead you to the right conclusion. And as I said, you will find projects in the world like this that get done without pilots, but I think you'll find them in very specific circumstances, like a Florham Park or Hanover Township, where the tax rate is super low, lower than the pilot. Or you'll find them in, you know, somebody that owns land that nothing needs to be done to and has it at a real low basis. But it would be the unusual case, not the common case in multifamily residential projects in North Jersey.
Thank you. And I want to, Mr. Gross?
Yeah, Council President, if I could just maybe look at this from a slightly different angle. I've been doing this for about 35 years now, and I can tell you without a doubt, this particular project or projects of its size and magnitude will not be built in any of these Essex County communities with a high tax rate in the 3 to 4 range without a pilot. No question about it. There's not even a starter. So that goes to this issue that people bring up about losing tax dollars, like giving a pilot. You're losing a tax dollars. If only they had paid real taxes, how much money we would have gotten. Well, you can't receive money, or you can't anticipate money, and you certainly didn't lose money that you never would have gotten because you couldn't possibly have built it. That's number one. Number two, we tend to think of these pilots in 5, 10, and 20-year deals, but the reality is this development is forever, and whatever benefit you don't think you're getting during this period of time, when the pilot is over, you're going to have a project that's probably 5 or 10 times the size of what you might have built without one, and that goes on forever, and that tax base goes on forever within the municipality. So there's real long-term advantages of this that nobody's even talking about. And you know, we have to think in the long term, because we're now in West Orange living and dealing with properties that were built 30 and 50 years ago. And we take it for granted that if they hadn't been built, what would we be looking at and what would we be dealing with? So I just think that the other side of this story of the pilot, just we've yet to find the right way to tell all of the good parts of it. So that's what I want to put out there.
Thank you, Mr. Gross. Councilwoman McCartney, I see your hand up.
Thank you. So along those same lines, one of the comments that was made by our former council colleague was about increased costs. So Mike, can you talk about that too? Because I am going to assume that this is going to be tiered, that after so many years, the amounts change. Is that something that's being considered?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the real good things about pilot is you move with the economy. When conventional taxes, when the economy goes down, you lose tax appeals, right? And so in this case, when the economy goes down, you will also lose revenue because their revenue will go down. But when it goes up, you automatically get increases, and to the extent it outpaces your increases in tax revenues, you're a beneficiary of that. But as you know, I talked about early on, like from the municipal budget perspective, you're a toll good. You're already providing all the services you're going to provide to this area of town. You've been providing them as long as it's been developed. So to the extent we're adding significant amounts of revenue to the budget, that's revenue that doesn't need to be raised from the current taxpayer.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley. Did any of my other council colleagues have additional comments or questions?
So Mike, one more comment then. Thank you, Council President.
Go ahead.
For the record, can you talk about I guess I'm calling it services, but what actually is put into that payment in lieu of taxes? You just mentioned police, fire. There has to be a component for tuition. Should there be a child or tuition in the project? What makes up the actual payment?
I mean, the payment is a gross dollar amount for you to use what to use.
What we spend our money on, right? So that's what I meant. For the record, can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, as I said, I think when we went through this with on the original go round, public safety, we think the costs go down. That was the experience with Edison Battery. And, underutilized properties are subject to more kind of police and fire issues than active projects that a landowner is paying a lot of attention to and dealing with. As far as school children, you have capacity in your schools. These types of projects, because they're small units, don't produce school children as a general rule. We have the experience of Edison Battery, which is producing a very low number of children. The Rutgers multipliers would probably create an expectation of like 20 school children, something in that range for the Margate units. So again, when you build out infrastructure in government, whether it's for public safety, schools, et cetera, the administrative costs, the infrastructure, the curriculums, things like that, you've paid for it already. And so adding bodies is generally not incrementally expensive to you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley. Councilman Rutherford, I saw his hand up, and then Councilwoman Castellino.
Thank you, Council President.
You're welcome.
Just wanted to respond to some of the comments I heard since I was able to rejoin. I understand that developers may ask for tax abatements when they come into town and are looking to do projects. And if all of them are asking, I'm sure that does send a signal. I just don't agree that the signal is it can't be done any other way. The signal could be, this is how we negotiate, or we know West Orange may be at least open to having the conversation. It does not mean that the project cannot be done without it. And I think if we make that assumption, we hinder ourselves in our ability to negotiate, because we're assuming that they need that in order to go forward. And I don't think that's a fair assumption.
I don't think we make the assumption. We look at the presentation of the facts and then negotiate to the best level we can. We would, 100% of the time, we would be happy to say, you don't need a pilot, build it the way you want to build it. And that's not just in West Orange, that's in every place I've ever been to. Like, not one council person or mayor has ever sat down with me and been like, Mike, please find a way to do a pilot. They all don't want them because it's politically painful. No, explaining anything other than the normal as it relates to tax payments is something that no one wants to do. But there, I have a really large amount of experience, and lots of the people in this conversation have, including the mayor, the administrator, the CFO, the attorney, have over a decade of dealing with these problems. Councilman McCartney, for sure. And so you know what the base case is, and it's not a mystery as far as what it takes to get things done. And people don't build projects to lose money. We know that. And so I don't mean to say we make any assumptions, but we're not surprised by results we've seen over and over again.
So I wouldn't disagree with you that it's politically painful for mayors and council to be supportive of pilots. I think that's true, but I think the reason why it's politically painful is because the numbers end up not helping. I mean, I know we want to compare what we're getting post-pilot to what we're getting now, but a couple of things have been said in this. One thing Mr. Hanley just said a moment ago is 61% of our budget goes to the school, or 2.23% of the 4.284. Those are the notes I have. I could be off, but 61% or so of our budget goes to the school. That's because we have a certain number of students and a certain number of facilities and a certain number of employees and a certain, payment for their benefits and their retirement and all of the things that go into running a school district. And every child that enters that school district has an impact. We know we spend, $20-something thousand per year per child.
Yeah.
So
wait, I don't agree with that statement. So
so children don't add to the budget?
Very small amount, if any. It depends on what your capacity is, which my understanding is we have capacity, because you have to pay for an administration. That does not change whether you're there. If you have capacity in your schools, your capital costs don't change by adding the student. Your curriculum costs, all those things are built in. Government acts far more like a toll good than it does like a good where you have to buy a piece of something to build it to move on. That's not the way government works. I mean, you run a municipality, right? When 5 more people move into town, your administrator still costs the same, your attorney still costs the same, your CFO still costs the same, City Hall still costs the same, your fire and safety still costs the same, because they're covering the road miles that already exist. And so every new student does not cost you $25,000, and most of them probably cost you, when you have capacity, almost nothing.
So I hear the argument. I would respectfully disagree. I mean, there is a reason why. I mean, maybe 5 people in a 50,000 town, 50,000, population town won't make a difference. But there's a reason why we have to project out how many schools we're going to need, how many classrooms we're going to need, how many teachers we're going to need.
But actually, Councilman Castellino speaks probably better on this than I do, but you have demographic reports that are not stating what you're presenting. I mean, the demographic reports say that the school children can be absorbed.
So perhaps they can. I'm not saying we don't have classroom space for 5 additional students or the 12 or so that you project from this project. But the neighborhood that I live in, when it was built, and I purchased a home here, I was told that there would be about 12 students from this neighborhood that would enter the school system. It was said because of the type of neighborhood, there wouldn't be many children. It would be primarily, empty nesters or downsizers or, those kind of folks a little bit older and not having children that would go into the schools. And I guess there was some calculation made for private school as well. But that was wrong. That calculus was wrong. I mean, we had more than 12
I
students
don't-
graduate last year.
I can't speak to that calculus, but I can speak to this calculus. So the Rutgers has studied tens of thousands of units in the state of New Jersey. And they project for these types of units, very small number of school children. The reason there's a small number is because they're small units and they're expensive. People that can pay the rent to get into these apartments, if they want to have 3 children, they move someplace else. The Rutgers then redid the study in 2018 and came up with lower numbers than they had before, because for the newer buildings, because they're more highly amenitized and more expensive. So I can't speak to the math that was given on your example. I don't know anything about it, and it may have been wrong, but this has been worked on for, probably 2 decades by Rutgers. The math is like really not well known. We have a great example in our own town of a building that was built and produced, a precious small number of school children. So we have to take that data as dispositive compared to, what you're describing tonight.
Well, I would be interested to know what our track record is with these estimates, regardless of how they've been formulated. I would like to know what our track record is. How, when we've done these projects in the past, how did our projection for the impact on the schools measure up to reality? And I think that should be known.
Councilwoman Rutherford, I think Councilwoman Castellino, as the Board of Ed liaison and former board member, may be able to better speak to that if we can give her the floor for this comment.
Sure.
Oh, thank you, Councilwoman Castellino. You're muted, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Council President and Councilman Rutherford. You bring up some excellent points. Those were many of my concerns many years ago when I sat on the school board, when Liberty Middle School opened up. The developments were were in the middle of being built. That whole area there, I was afraid of hundreds of school-age children. They're beautiful, large units. And now with the single-family homes over by Viscania. But there's all projections. It's in we'll get you the last school board report of the numbers. They have tracked them. They did a study, I think a year or 2 ago. Every 5 years, the school board does a demographic study to keep up with the numbers. And to match what Mr. Hanley is saying, the last time I checked in at Edison Lofts, which would be a comparable to Executive Drive, because you have to be comparable with your housing stock, I believe there was only 3 school-age children. So we could get the current number. It was very, very low a few months back. That's not to say that somebody hasn't moved in, but you look at the amenities, and the amenities at Executive Drive are geared toward empty nesters. As you know, there's not a playground included in the plan. It is all great empty nester amenities. They have the pool, the gyms. We talked about a jitney for people if they do go back working, which is looking pretty dim these days as well. So I'm not too concerned with school age children coming out of those units. We've been getting more of a turnaround with single family homes. We've had an influx of folks coming in from New York. And so I think that we'll look at the numbers, but we also have had people leaving the district as well. Some of these new residents coming in, I spoke with when I was campaigning this summer. Because of COVID, some of them were going straight into private school because our schools weren't open. We've had some students go to private school during this year because of COVID. So school board, that's going to be a task that they're going to have to see what their numbers are. They are going to their budget season, and they should be getting their reports per class rooms to see what the exact class sizes are come this spring. So as they prepare their budget, so we could, I've had a meeting with them this past Friday, talking with the superintendent, and we'll request those numbers when they have them. But right now they are at capacity according to their last demographic reports. And they do study all the developments, even the new current one over by Colonial Woods Drive up there that overlooks 280. So they've been tracking all these developments. So we will keep studying them.
So I think thank you, Councilwoman. I think that's important for us to consider.
Absolutely.
Because we know that when residential taxpayers pay their taxes, they generally use more in services than they pay in taxes. And a big part of that is the school.
Yeah.
So.
I would.
And just one more, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, there are different kinds of residential taxpayers, and I think that single family homes, that's an absolutely correct statement. But one bedroom apartments, I don't agree with that.
Yeah. And
So
Mr. Hanley, I just want to also just to give you some other information, because this does come up time to time. We do, when we have a new resident that might move in with a child that have added district needs, obviously that is a larger cost that would have to be funded right away by the taxpayers. But the school board calculates, they budget each year for the number of added district placements. So some years they're under that number. So that is already budgeted into each year's budget. So so to Mr. Hanley's point, when he was saying as far as the budget, there are calculations based on historical data that they're able to calculate that. So that is something that's calculated in each year. Just wanted to share that with everyone.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Hanley, though, that number is still an average, and that average would include all the various types of residential property taxpayers.
No. I mean, as far as public school children, the Rutgers breaks it down by unit type, by when they were built. It's a very specific study by number of bedrooms. It's well studied. It is not generalized. They've studied tens of thousands of units. They bring it forward. They do it by type.
So when you look at all residential property taxpayers as a group, just segmenting residential versus commercial, residential property taxpayers tend to use more in services than they pay in taxes. Is that not a conclusion of that study?
That's not what that study is meant to do. What I'm talking about as it relates to that study is a projection of school children specifically.
All right, so
I think we know that municipalities with large commercial taxpayers generally have a lower effective tax rate compared to all residential municipalities. So your general statement that residential taxpayers are more costly and the connection to school services, I don't disagree with. I agree with that. What I'm telling you is across types of residential taxpayers, people in one-bedroom apartments that live alone or live with their spouse, and they flush a toilet in the morning, commute to the city, and come back at night, cost the municipality nothing to have. Large large single family homes with 3 children who are in the recreation program and using the public schools and whatever, using a much larger number of services. This project is a multifamily residential project with small, expensive units. And they are not going to overburden the school system. They, you know, as we've discussed, that did not happen with Edison Battery. And I don't believe it will happen with this project. And I think it's a well-studied area as it relates to who lives in these buildings and how they act.
And I don't think we have to, you know, we can go further behind the theory, you know, based on the studies. Look at the real world experiences, whether you've been in Maplewood or South Orange or Montclair, and yes, in West Orange. When we build these types of units, that's the result. The result is they don't put a lot of school kids into the system. So there's no reason to believe that if we continue to build more of those units, that's going to change.
Council President, I wanted to add from a planning perspective also, because what Bill, in the community where Bill is, there are no options there. I believe they're all 3-bedroom units in Vizcaya and in Bel Air. The single family homes are all 3, probably 4-bedroom units. What we've been doing on the planning board is that even in the Edison lofts and in this plan as well, those 3-bedroom units have been significantly lowered and increased the studios and the 2 bedrooms, or the bedroom and the den.
Yeah.
So that's the difference where the number of school children, we're looking at that from a planning perspective, and the types of units, which is what you're talking about right now, the types of units and the numbers of children that can be generated. So that's from a planning perspective.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Rutherford, you have other questions? I just wanted to look at,
I'm probably not going to be popular tonight, so I have plenty of questions. Yeah.
Popularity. I wanted us, since we're going to be discussing this pilot application tomorrow during the meeting, I wanted to know if any of my council colleagues had any questions on the actual application. I wanted to ask the administration, I don't know, if Mr. Gross or Mr. Hanley would be, and where did everybody, there you are, could talk about, and I'm looking at the application, I'm trying to see what page this is. It's part of the pro forma. So it's page 45 of 77, exhibit 13, table 10. If Mr. Hanley can just walk us through that for the benefit of those who are listening, as well as the council colleagues.
Sure. Yeah,
I'm sorry, is that something we can put on the screen?
I don't think so. It is on the town, it is on the website, it's on the agenda. It's an exhibit on the agenda, but I don't have it to share now. It is talking about the projected tax and pilot payments, starting from year 1 through year 14, how they're all pilot payments. And year 15, there is a different installment. Can you just give us an overview of that? I know we've discussed it, but for the benefit of the public, I wanted you to give a brief overview. So just for those listening, I'm looking at table 10. Again, this is posted on the township website on our council packet agenda, and it is the pilot application. I looked through it, I didn't see anything different from the last one, but this is basically an overview of the projected tax and pilot payments from year 1 through year 30. And it includes the pilot payments as well as municipal payments to the county and what have you. Can you just give us a brief overview of that?
Sure. So the year column, I think we can all understand, it's years 1 through 30 of the pilot. The minimum tax column connects to the statute. So the pilot is whatever it is during the first 14 years. In year 15 through 30, you have statutory minimums that are connected to the percentage of conventional taxes. As you can see, it starts at 20% for 6 years, goes to 40% for 6 years, then 60% for 2 years, and 80% for 2 years. The projected AGR is gross revenue. So that's the amount of revenue the project is expected to produce annually. You can see the pilot, the actual calculation of the pilot is 10.5% of gross revenue. And it, so if you were to multiply the AGR line by 10.5%, you will see, you'll get the numbers that appear on the screen. The pilot to the municipality is the amount that the municipal budget receives from the pilot. The county receives 5% of the pilot according to the statute. The municipality gets an administrative fee that is 2% of the pilot that's paid. And there are additional minimum payments. The minimum payment in the right-hand line is the greater of the various calculations on the left. So
And I also wanted you to stress, because you mentioned that column 1, it's the minimum according to statute. So according to statute, there are percentages that of income that we have calculated into this application. And my recollection is the first is 10.2%, 11, and then a 12.2%. And over the time span of what year? How many years?
it's the statutory minimums are a percentage of conventional taxes, and they're in the far left-hand column, which is, as I said, in years 15 through 20, you're at 20%. In years 21 through 26, you're at 40%. 27 to 29, you're at 60%, and in year 30, you're at 80% conventional taxes.
So I think my question then, maybe I didn't ask it properly, was the percentage of income sharing, if you will. So the pilot payment itself, prior to the time where we get to the conventional taxes, by statute, there are percentage maximums that we're allowed to benefit from. Is that correct? I'm trying to find it as I'm scrolling through our application.
But yeah, I mean, you're obviously we're sharing differently. So the conventional taxes, we receive, 30% or something like that of the conventional taxes. And in the pilot, we get to receive 95% of the pilot. Is that the question you're asking?
Well, I did read that there was a statutory maximum of income that they can generate.
Oh, are you talking about net profits?
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Okay.
I apologize.
No, my apologies. I'm scrolling through this application and I just wanted.
Yeah. So, okay, I didn't follow the question. So yes, the statute puts a maximum net profit on the developer, such that if they were to receive more than a 12% yield, that would be, they would have to pay that back to the municipality. And, it certainly doesn't happen at the beginning of the projects, and it's rare, but Jersey City has been paid net profits back by developers who were making too much money on projects because the economy improved so much during their life.
One municipality cannot be
For
the
hearing that answer, I didn't understand in the beginning.
No, I should have highlighted it in advance, but I want to just, I wanted to point that out to my council colleagues in advance of tomorrow as you're reviewing these packets, if you haven't done so already. I know Councilwoman Castellino and Councilwoman McCartney, obviously we've gone through all of this before, but just some highlights I wanted to share with my council colleagues and the members of the public to understand that a lot of what is contained in the pilot structure itself is statutory, is regulated, and when you follow it, there is a benefit to the community for this project, in my opinion. But I just wanted to kind of give you that mind frame or that mindset. Okay, and I'll tell you exactly what page it's on, 9, and I was way down. So it's on page 9 for my council colleagues to start looking at as they're reviewing it, the proposed rates and the phases of conventional taxes versus the net profits sharing. I think it's important for the public to also understand, and these are very complicated, I'm not an expert in any stretch of the imagination, still researching, but there are mandatory statutory regulations that this application for pilot payments, which are payments in lieu of taxes, are included in the application. So as we're going through this, I want you to keep that in mind. And also page 7 of the application, again, that application is on our website, on the agenda. For the current tax assessments, the real property tax levy is $341,953 for one of the buildings and $393,289 for the other. And these are described here as block and lot numbers, so I can't tell you whether it's 200 or 100. But we're also looking at the total of over $1 million in revenue generating as a result of this project, in addition to the library, and thankful to the administration for trying to go back to the table with the developers to seek out additional benefits for the community. But I wanted to point that out so that when everyone is looking at this, that we understand that this is, there are a lot of protections here for the township as well. Coming up on hour 3, and I think, John, if you were a wagering man, I would have probably lost. If there are any other questions or comments from my council colleagues or the administration. All right, hearing none, I am going to ask that we adjourn this meeting, take some time to continue to review, and we do once again have tomorrow town council meeting where we will be discussing this again. Another opportunity for the public to also weigh in. Councilwoman Castellino, I did see your hand go up.
I'm just seconding you. Great job.
Thank you, everyone. And again, thank you to the administration for taking the time, putting this all together, and hopefully tomorrow we'll have more robust discussions and be able to make a decision on what's on our agendas for tomorrow. Thank you, everyone from the public for sticking with us, and I wish you all a good night.
Night.
Good night.